I think they basically didn't know how to do it, but I said if they got really stuck, they should call you.
Yes, that's fine. I haven't heard from any of them regarding town meetings. They have been contacting us about interviews.
Yeah.
But yeah, if they contact me, that's fine. I can assist them.
Right. I think they weren't following the directions, is what it was.
Okay. And Madam Mayor, we will have a few people on tonight for public comment.
Okay.
And I will be they'll be on the telephone only, and I'll be putting their name or their first initial and last name in my box.
Do you know what they want to talk about?
No, they did not identify which specific issues.
Okay. Well, this will be interesting. Well, we have a quorum. But we are missing there. Hello, Sam. Hello, Ron. Hello, Terry. Hello, Brian. Hello, Charlie.
Hello. Hello. Hello, Terry's dinner. So I understand we have a new superintendent, Mayor.
Yes, we do. I think it's Peter Gray, who's the current principal at Goodwin. And he survived a full-scale national search, so it must be pretty good. All right, it's 7 o'clock. We do have a quorum, although we are...
Recording in progress.
I am assuming that our missing council members will join us as we go ahead. There's Peter. Okay, so we're only missing 2. All right. This is the February 28th, 2022 meeting of the Mansfield Town Council, and it is 7:01, and I'm calling the meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is a roll call. Ms. Chain, please.
Osberger.
Here.
Berthelot.
Here.
Bruder.
Here.
Coleman.
Here.
Frattoni. Kotchenberger.
Here.
Moran.
Here.
Shuren.
Here.
Shaken. Thank you.
Thank you. And if they join us later, I'm sure they will be added to the minutes at the time they arrive. The next item is an opportunity for the public to address the council, and I gather we have members of the public present. Mr. Aylesworth, you want to tell us who we have? Oh, here's Mr. Shaken.
I don't know if all members of the public that were looking to address the council themselves are here yet. I'll defer to Tasha. She recalls the names of folks.
There were 3 people that contacted me about addressing the council tonight, but only one of them is on the phone now, and that is Mr. Zach England.
Okay, well, Mr. England, before you speak, let me just briefly state some of the rules. We ask you to state your name and address. You have 5 minutes to speak, and you can speak on any topic, whether or not it's on our agenda. We ask you to be civil, and we can't see you. Are you just on the phone?
I am on the phone.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay. Council members, thank you for allowing me to speak to you this evening. I won't be long, but I'd like to roadmap what I'm going to say. I have a 4-point comment. First, I'd like to address a point I've heard here and elsewhere that masking isn't a big deal. Then I'd like to talk about what circumstances I think justify a masking mandate. Then I'd like to reflect on the updated health guidance from the Centers for Disease Control. And finally, I have 2 calls to action for you. First, to the point I've heard here and elsewhere that masks aren't a big deal or masks are normal. It may be the case that an individual wearing a mask isn't a big deal. It's certainly not a big deal for me because I'm fortunate enough to do my work from home, even outside of COVID. As an aside, though, I have a 2-year-old son, and since we moved to stores last August, he's been delayed in learning to talk. Now, there are lots of reasons why that could be, and we certainly can't attribute it to any specific cause, but the parent in me jumps to the fact that he spends all day not seeing his teacher's faces as they speak to him. But again, that's a personal consideration for me and not something I think you should weigh heavily. While masks may indeed not be a big deal for an individual, the government forcing citizens to cover their faces in public is a very big deal. We know this. There have been regimes throughout history that have forced particular classes of people, such as women, to cover their faces in public, and we see that as a breach of their rights. There's a famous English idiom that we all know, which is intended to show shame, because I won't be able to show my face in public. But while an individual may find wearing a mask to be a trivial mitigation, the government using its power to force that person to cover their face is extremely abnormal in our culture. Now, just because it isn't normal for the government to force people to cover up their faces doesn't mean that the government isn't justified to use that force. Desperate times call for desperate measures. If the benefit to be gained is large and crystal clear, there's no question that you are justified to act in an emergency. We can abide extreme compromises on individual rights and freedoms in times of crisis. The question then, to me, is if the circumstances of the current moment necessitate the government to use its authority and its monopoly on force in our society to compel the people in Mansfield to cover up their faces. In updated guidance from the CDC, the answer is no. From their latest guidance, people with symptoms, a positive test, or exposure to someone with COVID-19 should wear a mask, and people may choose to mask at any time. But Talon County bears the lowest designation of COVID risk in the updated scoring system, and the CDC does not endorse universal masking policies under that designation. This brings me to my calls to action. First, I think you should remove the Mansfield mask mandate today. read of the foremost infectious disease experts in the country, forced universal masking in Mansfield is not justified by the current level of risk. Second, and more importantly, I think you should publicly state what conditions do and don't require forced masking. Perhaps you disagree with the experts at the CDC, and you think the conditions in Mansfield today do necessitate a universal masking mandate. Then I think it is incumbent on you to specify what observable metric would cause you to change your mind. Deferring to the experts is no longer enough because the experts say that masking is not justified, or forced masking is not justified. So we, the people of Mansfield, deserve to know why the current circumstances require emergency constraints on us. What I don't think would be principled is to say that you will remove the mandate in 2 weeks if conditions stay the same. Either the conditions today justify a forced masking policy, and you should tell us exactly what those conditions are, or they don't, and the masking policy should be removed. Needing an arbitrary length of time for the state of the world to be the same as it is today is unnecessary and an affront to the emergency powers that you have been trusted to exercise. Thank you. And I realize I didn't say my address. I live at 1926 Stores Road in Mansfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. England. I think you should stay tuned for the parts of the meeting where we discuss this issue. It is definitely on our agenda. Ms. Smith, is there anybody else from the public who wishes to speak?
No one else called in tonight, but I would like to add that Mr. England did submit a letter, but it came in after the packet was published, so it will be in the next council packet, and I will forward it to the council tomorrow for them to look at.
Thank you.
Mayor, I do have that Tasha provided me one written comment that was asked to be read into the public record. Under public comment.
Go ahead.
This comes from Betty Rossman. Good afternoon. It is past time to open up the council meetings, hold meetings in person in council chambers. Regarding the Mansfield Discovery Depot, do not do a contract out so far as proposed. At the most, do a contract for 3 years commencing at the retroactive date proposed. It is past time for this council to recognize that former councils have made serious mistakes which continue to be financial burdens on the citizens. Getting involved with this daycare project is but one serious mistake. It is time to extricate the town. Look carefully at the grant this town manages for MDD. I urge you to give MDD notice that this town will not apply for the grant again. MDD serves many towns. Perhaps one of them will take over the grant and some of the other work Mansfield provides to MDD. Under no circumstance should a new contract allow for this town to apply for any other grants. You are responsible for judicious spending of my tax money. There's no justification for using my money to subsidize a private corporation. Start now to disentangle this town from MDD. Give good thought to spending the federal money. Provide information to the public as to possible projects, and then listen to the citizens. It is past time for this council to do something about Parks and Rec and the money that the project costs the citizens. Betty Wassman.
Did she include her address? We're certainly familiar with Ms. Wassman, but...
She has not provided her address.
Okay, came in on an email. All right. Anybody else? Mr. Osberger.
Mayor, I believe she lives on Old Turnpike Road.
Well, it's usually used to identify a resident. We're certain that Ms. Wassman is a resident of Mansfield. Unless she's moved. No. Okay, and so there's no other public comment? Then the next item on our agenda is the report of the town manager, Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Mayor. The council's aware that in late January we had an initial meeting with representatives from the Connecticut Department of Transportation as well as UConn. That meeting was organized as a response to a joint letter that the town of UConn submitted to the Commissioner of DOT, urging immediate action to address pedestrian safety concerns in the downtown area with a specific focus on Stores Road and South Eagleville Road. Council is obviously very aware of the tragic death of a graduate student on South Eagleville Road in late fall. So we had that meeting in late January, and we had some good initial discussion. DOT certainly did its part to lay out its view of things and speak to why Some of the safety measures we had inquired about, including rectangular flashing beacons, had not already been installed at various uncontrolled crosswalks at 275. And they also basically immediately agreed to move up installation of RRFBs at various crosswalks on Storage Road, basically moving those projects up 1 year. I'm happy to report that in our follow-up meeting, which happened this past Friday, additional forward progress is made. Actually, I would almost call it remarkable progress. DOT came to this meeting ready to commit to certain things, as did UConn for that matter, and that included DOT's commitment to replace multiple existing speed limit signs on South Eagleville Road to ensure that the new signs would have the retro reflective surfaces that would improve safety. Include DOT agreeing to install new crosswalk sign assemblies at each of what I believe are 4 uncontrolled crosswalks on South Eagleville Road, extending eastward towards Maple Road. UConn offered to cover the costs associated with installing solar-powered Your Speed signs on South Eagleville Road, so the only thing the town would have to provide is assistance with the installation of those signs. We went over the process for the town to submit a request for an application for a road safety audit along South Eagleville Road, as well as a portion of Storage Road, to further explore some of the safety improvements that we've recommended or requested of DOT. And we submitted that late last week, and I understand from Director Carrington today, DOT actually approved that application request. So that's even after my report was generated. So they have moved as quickly on that as they promised. And then UConn, specifically through their chief of police, has expressed a receptivity to working with the town on any cost share associated with installation of RRFBs on crosswalks of concern, South Eagleville Road. I think we're all optimistic that there will be federal funds through the new infrastructure legislation that would be a great candidate to support a large chunk of this cost. But any residual where there's a local match required, it sounds as though UConn is amenable to splitting that leftover cost that normally the town would have to absorb. So these are all very favorable developments. I know the mayor took part in the meeting, as well as several town staff and myself. And I think we all, walked away from it feeling pretty good about progress. It might not be perfect, but a lot of measurable progress in this area, and appreciate DOT listening to our concerns, and UConn stepping up, at least to this point, agreeing to be a really constructive partner in all of this. So that's one, key announcement. Another, actually, from the same day, a little later that morning, this past Friday, we had a meeting with Congressman Courtney and his staff. Meeting was actually supposed to be in person, but because of the snowstorm, we ended up doing it virtually. But the meeting, at least initially, the focus was on efforts and projects that the town is looking to put in place as it relates to improved broadband and public Wi-Fi access using federal funds, i.e. rescue plan funds. And so we were able to give an overview to Congressman Courtney and his staff about our proposed digital inclusion initiative that you all have heard of as part of the rescue plan proposals that was submitted by our IT director, Jamie, and our library director, Leslie. Collaboration there to enhance public Wi-Fi availability throughout town. And it's really a lot more than that, but that's sort of a highlight of it. So we talked to Congressman Courtney about that. He seemed very impressed. And again, we talked about other federal funding that could be used not just for broadband, but a wide range of infrastructure needs that the town may have. And so it definitely sounds like the congressman is keenly interested in projects that we're trying to pursue. His staff stands ready, willing, and able to help us identify funding opportunities and for their office to lend support to various proposals that we're going to be looking to advance. So myself and staff are going to be monitoring things very closely. A lot of these large buckets of funding, they haven't actually opened the grants yet. They're still defining, I think, what some of these grants are, with TBD application periods in the spring. So it's going to be a flurry of activity, I'm sure, in the spring with lots of towns pursuing the same money. But we think we have a number of really pressing needs, compelling needs that will hopefully bubble to the surface for some of these competitive grants. This was already teased a moment ago, maybe technically before the start of the meeting. I can't remember if it was before the meeting gavelled into order or not, but Mansfield Board of Education did announce the hiring of a new superintendent. He's a known quantity, Peter Dart, the current principal of Goodwin School, and before he was at Goodwin, where he's been, I think, three or 4 years, Peter was an assistant superintendent for talent development at Hartford Public Schools, and so definitely has a lot of quote-unquote front office experience, central office experience in education leadership. I have gotten to know Peter a little bit in my capacity as town manager, and very much look forward to working with him as he transitions into the new role. And we'll be sitting down, over coffee or luncheon in the near future to talk about shared priorities, and for me to really start to understand his management philosophy and his goals and priorities as he settles into that position this summer. And so congratulations to Peter. I think the district has made a great hire. We continue to make progress on the construction of the new consolidated elementary school. There's seemingly an ever-increasing number of eyes and scrutiny on the project as we, assess our current construction schedule and timeline and where we are in that schedule, and if we're on the critical path, and we will continue to do so. And to the extent needed, contingency plans will be explored. A few updates on behalf of the Downtown Partnership. First, I wanted to make sure that members of the Town Council, as well as the public listening at home, is aware of a wayfinding program that we were working on. It's sort of the next stage of our branding rollout, if you will. And there's an opportunity for residents to go to the town website and click on a link for hidden gems, and it's a survey basically, and provide information on locations that you would want to have identified as part of our comprehensive wayfinding program. So if you think we have some really great eateries, other hangouts in town, especially things we think might be overlooked or missed, please take the time to go to the town website and click on that survey link and provide your feedback. I know at least one member of the council is already very aware of Mansfield Willie Restaurant Week. I saw Councilor Coleman weigh in with his comprehensive reviews on some of the places that he's had a chance to frequent, but that continues through March 6th. As a reminder, that's a collaboration between the town, the Downtown Partnership, and Thread City Development and Willie Next, basically to bring attention to all the diverse dining destinations and offerings in our collective communities. And also wanted to, shifting gears a little bit, wanted to make sure that folks were aware that the Taste of Mansfield, that collaborative initiative of a wide range of stakeholders, is partnering to launch the Taste of Mansfield Champion annual award program, and that's with the intent of recognizing Mansfield producers, sellers, and communicators and educators who are leaders in connecting the Mansfield community through local food and have a demonstrated record of promoting Taste of Mansfield's mission. And nominations, I believe, can be made through the middle portion of March 15th, I believe, and there's a nomination form on the town's website. So hopefully people who are familiar with the agriculture scene and local producers will take the time to check that out and consider nominating somebody that you think is doing a great job promoting local agriculture. March 11th is the annual Senior Center St. Patrick's Day Luncheon. It was previously advertised as a drive-through event, and I think that's still going to be the case. Looking forward to taking part in that again this year, just as I did last year. Didn't sample any of the fare last year, but the smell was wonderful for those who love corned beef. So looking forward to seeing a lot of friendly faces and people enjoying the wonderful food that the Senior Center produces right there on site. A shout out to Parks and Rec. Always has a lot going on, but one of the things that was pretty cool was there was a Teachers Professional Day on Friday, February 18th, and they helped organize and deliver a Wildlife Day themed outdoor and indoor full day program. It was 7:30 to 5:30 p.m. And basically that Wildlife Day theme program was I think 25 children took advantage of it, and I'm sure that helped out a lot of families that otherwise would struggle to find childcare for that day with school not being in session. And I think, in the interest of time, I'm going to stop my report there and field any questions the council has.
Questions for Ryan? Seeing none, we'll proceed to reports and comments of council members. Mr. Coleman, did you have a question?
I have a couple. First, on the crosswalks on 275 and 195, we're applying for grant money to resolve that situation. Isn't a DOT responsible to fund that?
I think there are several separate projects underway, each of them having separate funding sources. And one of the really hopeful outcomes of that meeting that Mr. Aylesworth reported on was a real collaboration between the university and the town to fund and put up things that the state has declined to provide for.
That was the question to the town manager, Madam Mayor.
All right, Mr. Aylesworth, you wish to answer?
Only to say that those RFBs are in fact equipment and infrastructure that DOT will be responsible for in a situation where the location basically rose to a level per their specifications that would warrant it. Their position is that those particular crosswalks do not have the foot traffic or vehicle traffic to warrant, or other considerations as well, including sort of like the things like the geometry of the site, the location, etc. Does not rise to the level of requiring those beacons. That's DOT's position. We wouldn't necessarily agree with that. We've pushed back on that, but that's DOT's position.
Okay. The bottom of the report, let me get to the bottom of it here. I believe there was something you said about 2 drainage culverts that have collapsed. Is that correct?
Yes, that was included in the report. Do you want more information on those?
Who installed that drainage? Did we install that and then it failed?
I'll turn it over to Mr. Carrington to speak to those particular drainage situations.
Good evening. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, those are old installations, probably from 40 years ago. Just the pipes are failing, and that happened in the 2 locations there. So nothing new.
And then the tree service. Why, after we have purchased all the equipment in the bucket truck, why are we still relying on arborist tree care to help? I thought we purchased and spec'd out the correct equipment to do it.
Well, we did to a certain height. To get the height that his truck can go to would cost us more money. He's an expert in the field, and there's so many trees to cut down. I could hire probably 10 contractors and not catch up. I said that from the beginning when I said we needed this truck, that I was still going to have to hire a contractor to help support. Our crew is great. They're not doing anything wrong. They just need to be supplemented with someone when the trees are taller, and there's so many trees to cut that are dying.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, further questions for Mr. Ellsworth? All right, then we'll go to comments of council members. I just wanted to add to Mr. Ellsworth's comments about the meeting with DOT and UConn. DOT has actually moved ahead on some projects they hadn't intended to, aside from doing the improvements on 195 a year earlier. They are encouraging the collaboration with UConn, and as you can see, guaranteeing a turnaround of approval on those things which they will not fund directly, but which the university and the town can do together. In addition, it was really gratifying to hear the level of collaboration that the university is willing to engage in with the town on these issues. This meeting was extremely cordial and collaborative. One of the interesting outcomes for me is I have been concerned about the absence of a crosswalk in front of Dog Lane, and they have authorized a study, an inclusion of that area as part of their study. Both representatives of UConn and representatives of the town feel very strongly that is an area which needs a crosswalk. DOT said, well, people can walk to the existing crosswalks, but the fact of the matter is they don't. So they will come and study it. We will continue to encourage them to comply with our needs in this area. So we'll see what happens. There's also some discussion of whether or not the brick crosswalks are visible enough, and there is some discussion about putting more reflective paint, perhaps around or across those crosswalks. Mr. Carrington pointed out that we'd spend a lot of money on making attractive crosswalks and visible crosswalks, so that is not likely to happen, but I think the DOT is really responding to our needs on pedestrian traffic, so that's very helpful. Mr. Osberger.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I would hope that UConn, with their impending project there on 275, redoing Mansfield Apartments, would have kicked in and helped out somewhat. I would imagine the foot traffic is going to increase, tenfold with the amount of that they intend on building.
Yeah, well, there's another grant application dealing with that area that's pending already. That was submitted with UConn and the town. Mr. Konchenberger.
Thank you. Tony, when you mentioned the crosswalk on Dog Lane, do you mean further east near where the garages or stores are automotive, or where?
No, the crosswalk across 195 where Dog Lane intersects with 195. Yeah. I also wanted to point out that today was Matt Hart's first day as the executive director of CROG, and I'm sure that all of us wish him well in this new endeavor. He seems to have had a good first day. And that's all I have. Mr. Osberger, followed by Mr. Coleman.
I just wanted to touch base on something that we discussed at our last meeting with regards to the Helping Hands thing. If that's possible. I know that Ryan has sent me a fairly comprehensive letter. However, there's some things on there that I'm a little concerned about. That I'm seeing different. I have a difference of opinion on. The mailers that were sent out were sent to Foster Drive, but when I think of low-income people or people that have difficulties, my first thoughts are Wrights Village and Helenko's, and many senior people and disabled people may not be able to use a computer or have access to a town e-letter. So although these things are on these websites, and we say that we keep posting things on our websites, many of these people probably don't have access to that. So I think for them, and then even navigating is another thing I hear that's a difficult thing on our website. Numerous individuals that were spoken to who attended Mansfield Family to Farm, Food Share, and TFAP were not given any of this information. Secondarily, TFAP was canceled for the last 5 months of the program as well, and I'm curious why that happened. As far as being on the Town of Mansfield Facebook page, the 12/9/21 post was about child care and food, but was mostly written as child care. Food assistance really wasn't mentioned until quite a ways down the article and really wasn't noticed. And then on the Mansfield Human Services Facebook page, which I wasn't even aware we had, the post was mostly about child care, but also about food. Child care assistance posts were 2 to 3 times afterwards in March and April, but didn't specify anything about food assistance. And then, of course, there's individuals that were spoken to who received Helping Hand have not received notice of the March 3rd meeting. And people I've spoken with. Staff will be conducting a public hearing, as we know, on March 3rd, 2022, to update feedback on program from the community. Now, notice would be sent out to participating participants from the program, advertised 2 times in the Chronicle. Now, that's assuming that people get the Chronicle. Of course, the second publication has to run tomorrow because there was a newspaper error. But another public meeting will be held in October of 2022, as required by our agreement. So let's hope that this is the case. Now, it was nice that we did have this thing that was coordinated with Mo's. And we did have somewhat of an output on that. That was good. There were a couple of dozen or more that did do the build your own taco thing. The downside to that is delivery was not an option for this offering. As we know, we have people that are elderly or perhaps don't get out of the house or don't have transportation. So I would imagine that probably hamstrung the people from being able to actually participate in that program. And the program coordinator was not on site at Mo's. I think that would have been a good idea. But of course, delivery was not an option. And that's what I have for that. I mean, I know that on the things that you sent me, Ryan, you had said that you sent it to a bunch of events. I think specifics would be great. And I'm curious, again, still, why TPAP has been canceled for the last 5 months. Things that at the food share, or that they do at Wrights Village, there was no mention of this program at food share, and there hasn't been for 6 or 7 months now. And so I think that's the core of where your outreach needs to be. And I think we should start there. And that's all I have.
Just for clarification, what is TFAP?
I don't recall what the actual acronym means off the top of my head. Give me a second here.
Ms. Schneider is here. Maybe she could clarify the meaning of this program or the name.
I think it's the Emergency Food Assistance Program.
Okay. All right. What in particular are you asking for, Mr. Osberger?
Well, I'm just curious on several of these things. Why TFAP was canceled for the past 5 months. Why we aren't getting to the people that actually show up at food share. Why we weren't directly going to Wrights Village and pulling those. I know that his report says that that's what they did, but people there are telling me they never saw anything. And I would also maintain that it's difficult for people that are probably 50, 60, 70 years and older that may not be web savvy, may not be computer savvy, may not have a computer. And so relying on that and saying, well, just go look on our website is kind of a failure as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
So I would say staff support for this is kind of coming from 2 different departments. It's coming from planning and development, and it's coming from human services. I think I just saw Linda come off mute, so she, when it comes to planning and development's piece of this, she may have some thoughts she wants to share.
Good evening, everyone. So I do just want to clarify a couple of things that were in the memo that was provided today. First of all, the mailer that was referenced that went to down to colonial townhouses. That was a third mailer that we did because while we requested that May mailing go town-wide, because the colonial townhouses actually has a Willimantic address, we became concerned that they did not receive notice of the program with the initial May mailing. So that was a subsequent mailing that was sent to them because we were concerned that while we asked for it to go town-wide, given that they have a Willimantic address, they may not have received it. The May mailing was sent out to all addresses in town using the Postal Service's Every Door direct mail option. It's the same mailer that we used, or the same system that we used to do the affordable housing, the 2 mailers for surveys that we did with that. So everyone should have received a mailer because it goes by address, not by property owner. And that, again, is run through the Postal Service. We do hire a printer and tell them that we want it sent town-wide, and they take care of identifying the number of copies that we need and also handling the mailing itself. So we did do a mailer. We did not just rely on electronic outreach. As also noted in the report, there is a public hearing coming up on Thursday, and I've been informed by staff that an email is going to be going out to participants. They did not have a chance to do it before the end of the day. Additionally, with regard to Moe's, delivery was offered. We did not make that an option that we provided across the board to everyone, but for families that did not have transportation, our program coordinator, Jolene Woodmansey, personally delivered meals to those households. So the households that did not have transportation did receive meals from Moe's using staff to do that. She also went to Moe's at 5:30 on that Friday to witness the distribution to make sure that it went smoothly. So it's not the case that no one was there. She actually made the point of doing that. So in terms of the formal outreach, a lot of those are outlined. The informal outreach is something that happens with anyone we meet with. So if we meet with anyone in our office that we think may need assistance or might know someone, we encourage them to spread the word. We put it in the town manager's newsletter. Every 2 months, it goes out with that. We also rely on word of mouth, and that's how we get some of our residents. And we get them from our participants. We get them from families that are participating and tell someone else. We have been working with the schools to get to families. It has been the senior newsletter. The social workers at the senior center are aware of the program and share it with their clients that they think may benefit. So we're doing the best that we can. We can always try and do more on outreach, but I do want to say that this is one program out of a number that my office is running. This is not our area of expertise. We're doing the best we can while trying to also handle all of the normal planning and development activities.
Thank you. Mr. Asperger, follow-up?
Yes, I have a follow-up to that. I can tell you that just in my conversations with people in these areas, and again, I know it's wonderful that you're saying that it's going out in these newsletters, these e-newsletters and everything. Again, getting back to people that don't have access to computers or probably don't have computers themselves. Secondly, I spoke to 2 Board of Ed members that had no idea about this program until I told them about it at my last Republican Town Committee meeting. And for Board of Ed members to not even know about the program, I was flat out shocked. They were more shocked about it. I have one last question for Ryan, and that where does the leftover money go when we get to the tail end of this?
Well, as far as any leftover money, in terms of the mechanics for how that gets turned back at the end of the calendar year, if it's not used, Linda may have more insights in that respect. I just know that it is use or lose, as I understand it, by the end of this calendar year.
It goes back to the state unless we are granted an extension.
Okay, thank you.
I think Mr. Coleman had his hand up, and then Ms. Berthelot.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a couple comments. We have 6 days left to the Mansfield Willimantic Restaurant Week. I'd like to encourage everyone out and support our businesses. I am not sure if I'm going to get to all the restaurants, but I'm trying to and provide a review on the Mansfield Connection page. It's been extremely well received, and I encourage everyone to go out and have something to eat. I've got an extra 10 pounds on me.
Yes.
Yeah. Also,
I look at those menus. Yes.
Yeah. Also, I'd like to ask Ryan and Madam Mayor, I proposed two motions for the February 14th meeting in regards to mask mandate and coming back with public meetings. They were never put on the agenda, even though I requested them. Could I have a reason why that happened?
Well, the council adds things to future agendas in the course of the meeting, at the end of the meeting for future agendas. And I think your issues will be handled later tonight.
I have the two motions still, if I can present them tonight.
Well, I don't know if you're going to need to. Why don't we wait till we get to those areas?
Okay. Am I not allowed to propose motions ahead of time? Will they not be considered in the future?
According to the charter, I set the agenda for the council meetings. If you wish me to add something to the agenda, you should talk to me in advance, far enough in advance so they can get onto the council agenda, before the agendas are distributed.
I thought I did that through email, Madam Chair.
One of the issues was that we were waiting for Mr. Miller to return, and now that he's here tonight, we can have a much more substantive discussion.
Well, I think motions that are proposed by council members, they can go for a vote and they could be voted down. What's wrong with that approach?
That's true, but you're going to have a much better discussion tonight, I promise you.
Okay. I have brought this up in a couple of meetings in regards to the minutes that are kept for the council. In reference to council rules and procedure, Rule 2, Part H, as required by our rules and procedures. That
Mayor, we have referred this matter to the Personnel Committee. We're in reports of council. Are we raising motions now? What's going on?
Excuse me, Councilor Ben, if I may finish, I am on the committee. Now, let me finish, please.
Mr. Coleman, wait a minute. I can't hear two people speaking at once. Mr. Shaken, did you have a point of order?
I do, Mayor. We are making reports of council members, which is a time for council members to report the official business that they've conducted as councilors since our last council meeting. Of course, a motion is always in order, but Mr. Coleman is talking about things that have come up in past meetings that have been either resolved by motion or referred to a committee, things that are not on our agenda this evening. And I don't believe that they, absent a motion to add them to our agenda, are proper for conversation during this period of time that's already taken 45 minutes.
Councilor Shaken, if I may respond to Councilor Shaken, Madam Mayor?
Mr. Shaken has raised a point of order, which I need to rule on. I am going to rule that you can make a brief statement about what should be included in the minutes, but we are not going to take a vote on it unless you propose a motion and the council votes to add it to the agenda.
There is no need for a motion. The rules and procedures exist now, here and now. So a motion is totally unnecessary, as is that point of order. I am requesting that the minutes of our meetings follow Rule 2, Section 8, as they stand here and now. There's no motion needed. There's no point of order. It's just a comment from a council member of an existing rule. And tonight, I'm not going to be able to approve our minutes because they're not following number 2, Section 8.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Berthelot, followed by Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Bruder.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be brief. I just want to first say how much I appreciate Ms. Painter and her staff's work on the Helping Hand program, but also say that Mr. Osberger's concerns are very, of course, I'm sure everybody recognizes valid, and I just want to follow up and with his very strong suggestion that we need to do more, that the outreach needs to be more than we're doing at this time, and not to say specifically how that should work, but recognizing that people who are under-resourced are traditionally difficult to reach, and they take more effort. And he's absolutely right to point out that the ways that we reach other people may not be the right way to reach this particular population. And so I just want to second his sentiment that we should do all we can to spend this money and spend it appropriately. Thank you.
Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Bruder, followed by Mr. Aylesworth.
May I just ask real quick, but then I have an actual report. I am feeling, this is why we have agendas and we generally follow them. I am feeling very woefully unprepared and unknowledgeable about the conversation that is happening regarding this program. I know it was on our agenda several weeks ago, but I haven't seen any memo related to the efforts of the town that Mr. Osberger was referring to. I haven't been able to review and understand what Mr. Osberger has asked for and how the town staff has responded. And so I might suggest that this is a great topic for the council to put on our next agenda so that we and the public can have a full understanding of what's gone on, what communication has happened about it, and we can react and provide our feedback rather than having a debate during reports and comments of council members with staff or with each other about the state of a program that no one in town has had the opportunity, besides talking to Charlie, to comment to the council about.
Yeah, I would also add, Mr. Aylesworth, this is something you don't know, but because there's been some controversy around this in the past, we asked the town manager, who is providing information on a town program, to one council member to share that with the entire council. That way we're all coming to the table with the same information. I share Mr. Shaken's feeling. I had no idea what Mr. Osberger was really talking about. And had we had seen the report that you sent with him, it would be helpful. That's part of being a new town manager. So now, Mr. Shaken, you had a regular report?
I do. Mr. Sharn and I attended the first meeting of the Region 19 Reapportionment Commission last week, 2 weeks ago. And we chose our leaders, received a compelling presentation from the State Department of Education attorney, and elected Jeanette Picard from the Mansfield Board of Education to chair the commission with some executive officers from Wellington and Ashford by her side. We're awaiting some information about minutes of meetings and the like from 10 years ago when we did this. The report, which I think we got in our packets at some point from the State Department of Ed, is that based on this year's census or last year's census, Mansfield's share of votes on the regional board is now slightly underrepresented. For background, in case folks aren't aware, there are 12 board members, 4 from each town, but Mansfield has a more strongly weighted number of votes, number of votes per person. So a Mansfield Board of Ed member is worth more votes than an Ashford Board of Ed member, essentially. There's 2 other statutory ways that committee, the Region 19 board, could be constructed, but that's how we've chosen to construct. And so we have been tasked with deciding whether or not to recommend an adjustment to that structure or to that apportionment. Our threshold of underrepresentation is slightly under, but only slightly under the statutory requirement where we would have to adjust the apportionment. So we don't have details on next steps besides that I have volunteered Ryan to provide staff support in his office, to provide staff support so the committee can stay, up to date with FOIA and everything else. And it's a committee without a department, right? It's people from 3 towns being appointed to all work on it. But I suspect, based on the congenial nature of the first meeting, that we'll be done with our work relatively shortly. We have to report out by sometime in mid-May. We have 90 days from 2 weeks ago to make a recommendation, and then that recommendation will go to referendum in all 3 towns. We did learn, unfortunately, that by holding our organizational meeting 2 weeks ago, we have started an irreversible clock such that we will not be statutorily allowed to hold the referendum on the same day as the general election, which they didn't tell us until we had already convened the meeting. So that's my report. I don't know if Ron, if you had anything to add, but it should be a very compelling and interesting group.
No, 10 years ago, the process worked very smoothly. I'm sure it will again.
Thank you. Mr. Bruder, followed by Mr. Aylesworth, followed by Mr. Osberger.
Thank you, Mayor, for recognizing me. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the library staff and everything they're doing, because, you know, I have a couple of 10-year-olds where, you know, on these cold days, we're looking for something to do, and they've got a lot of different things there. They've redone the interior and just have a lot of materials that you can loan or just take advantage of while you're there. And I just wanted to point that out and pass along my thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At the risk of, you know, belaboring something that's already, you know, pretty belabored, and the last thing, believe me, last thing I want to do is add any additional tensions to a discussion, but just, you know, being party to this discussion and hearing some of the comments that have been made, you know, I can in good conscience, while the lights are on and when we're streaming live to households throughout town, not take a moment just to say that I believe that any characterization of the planning and development office's efforts to this point on helping hands to suggest that in some way all the stops aren't being pulled out, every effort isn't being made, every stone isn't being turned over. It's just not so. I see how hard Linda and Jolene and Jen and Sandy and the folks in that office work on this, and I know how much they care and how much sweat equity has gone into this along the way, and how closely they try to work with various, you know, municipal departments, stakeholder groups, Board of Education, trying to make sure that all the relevant information finds all the right people. And I don't think anybody would suggest that, you know, what we do is perfect and that there, you know, couldn't have been something done better or differently along the way. But, you know, this is definitely not a case of, you know, people just kind of going through the motions and doing bare minimums. There's tremendous commitment, personal, you know, above and beyond, well outside normal work hours being done, and very short staffed, I might add, with everything else they have going on to do it. So I'm not impugning anybody's motives. The motives anybody who's raised concerns, don't take it that way. All I know is how much my staff care, and I can't allow the conversation to transition to something else without saying that for the record. And I hope that's in the minutes.
Thank you. Anybody else have comment or report or comment from council members? All right, thank you. The next item on our agenda is a consent agenda. There are two sets of minutes, an appointment to a town committee, and an updated budget review calendar. Mr. Osberger.
Yeah, I still had one more thing I wanted to say before that. It was just very brief. I just wanted to apologize for Ben for not having gotten, I assumed that everyone had gotten the letter and yourself, so I apologize for everyone not being on the same page.
Thank you. It's an oversight by a new town manager, that's all. Mr. Coleman.
I would like the minutes pulled from the consent agenda.
All right, both sets?
Both sets, yes.
All right, so the consent agenda will be appointments to town committees and the budget review calendar. Do I have a motion to approve that consent agenda? Mr. Shaken?
So moved.
Second? Mr. Shuren. All right, any comments on the consent agenda? Is anybody going to oppose the consent agenda? Is anybody going to abstain? Ms. Berthelot?
Sorry. So there was a last minute change that came from Tasha regarding the Committee on Committees recommendations, where one person won't be able to serve. I don't think that's reflected in the current, it came sort of at the last minute. So I'm not sure how you should handle that or how that should be handled. One of the appointments had to pull out.
All right. There is a corrected motion that was sent to us. Mr. Shaken, are you going to have a solution for this?
I just noticed, I noted that the packet was updated online at 11:30 or something this morning, and I'm flying by the seat of my pants here, but the email from Tasha seems to indicate that someone named Carrie withdrew, and I do not see her name listed in the appointments in the packet that I am looking at from the consent agenda.
So we're looking at the correct consent agenda motion.
Can I frame that as a question that maybe Ryan or Tasha could clarify?
I believe that's the case, but I guess if Tasha's listening, I've asked her to confirm that.
Yes, the packet, the official packet does show the updated agenda item summary with the correct motion, removing Carrie's name. That has been confirmed with the town clerk. So the what you're voting on now is the one without Carrie's name, and that is the one that's in the packet online and the iCompass packet and the packet that the town clerk has in her possession.
Okay, so we can vote on that. All right, is there anybody who wishes to abstain from the consent agenda? Is there anybody who wishes to vote no on the consent agenda? All right, I will rule the consent agenda has been adopted unanimously. Now, the next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes. Would somebody move approval of these two sets of minutes?
Move to approve.
Moved by Mr. Shaken, seconded by Ms. Berthelot. Mr. Shaken.
Thank you, Mayor. In support of my motion, I appreciate the comments earlier around rules of procedure. It's a conversation we had several weeks ago. We referred the discussion to the Personnel Committee, which has traditionally dealt with our rules of procedure, and if I'm not mistaken, is planning on dealing with this particular issue. And the issue is, how do our minutes reflect the nature of the debate versus Robert's rules versus what is in our rules? I will note that Ms. Chain is following the procedure that this mayor and the previous mayor and the councils have set regarding the debate in the minutes. And so if that is to change, then we either need to update our rules or the mayor needs to amend her ruling about what those rules mean. So, but I believe that we have asked the Personnel Committee to consider those things and make a recommendation in the future. And so I would urge the councilors to support the motion to adopt the minutes, because they are an accurate reflection of our meeting based on the procedure that we have been operating under for at least the last 5 years.
Mr. Shuren.
The Personnel Committee did discuss this matter at some length today, did not come forth with a recommendation. As the rules of procedure stand, the Personnel Committee not having made any recommendation for an alteration in the rules of procedure.
All right, well, the motion is on the floor to approve two sets of minutes. If you don't approve of the minutes as they are presented, the option for you is to vote no. So the motion is on the floor. Further discussion. Ms. Chain, would you call the roll on this motion, please?
Yes. Osberger.
Abstain.
Berthelot.
Yes.
Bruder.
Yes.
Coleman.
No.
Frattoni.
I abstain because I wasn't at one anyway, so abstain.
Kotchenberger.
Yes.
Moran.
Yes.
Shuren.
Abstain.
Shaken.
Yes.
Thank you.
So what is the vote, Ms. Chain?
You have 3 abstentions, 1 no, and 5 yes.
All right, the motion is adopted. All All right, now, old business is COVID. Mr. Aylesworth and Mr. Miller.
I'll, I guess, just start off by briefly saying I think everybody's aware that the tail end of last week, some pretty significant new guidance came out from the CDC that changed the landscape quite a bit as far as thresholds for masking are concerned. These new community level metrics that take into account more than just sort of a snapshot in time's positivity rates. And so I'm sure these new metrics will be the basis or figure heavily into tonight's discussion about where we go from here as far as masking is concerned in particular. But with that, I'll turn over to Rob.
Thank you, Ryan. Madam Mayor, councilors. Quickly, I'll just start with some of my typical information. As of February 19th, there were just 20 cases of COVID in the town of Mansfield for the previous week. We have experienced within the health district population, as with the state as a whole, a significant decline, downward trend over the past 6 weeks, with a high of 725 cases during the first week of January, down to 67 cases for this past week ending 2/19. On the vaccination front, Mansfield continues to hold steady at around 82% fully vaccinated, compared to the health district population. It's 76%, and the Connecticut population is 72%. The state guidelines for transmission rates, which at this point it could be noted is distinct and different from the way the federal government is now measuring risk. Nonetheless, Mansfield number is currently at 10.9 per cases per 100,000 as of February 19th, which places it in the orange category, below the highest red category, which existed in the previous week. We do continue to operate weekly vaccination clinics. About 2 weeks ago, demand for vaccine dropped precipitously. We do continue to hold clinics on Mondays for adults and Thursdays for kids, and we're looking at, on each of those days, 4 or 5 patients coming in on any given day. At this point in time, our health district approach is to continue to vaccine every individual who walks through our door, one shot at a time. Testing demand also has gone down precipitously in the region. The last numbers I looked at for the Wyndham area, I think for the full week in the last week, it was down to, I don't have a firm number, but it was under 50 for the full week of tests which were administered. I did have a conversation with Dr. Ayer, medical director for UConn Student Health and Wellness today. They are, like many of us now, are in a transition period. She was unsure of any kind of timeline. She did indicate that leadership is reviewing policies and precautions around COVID. Actively reviewing and anticipate something from leadership at some point in time, but she couldn't really say when or where. So more to come on that, I'm sure. And then finally, as Ryan alluded to, there's been a significant change at the federal level. The CDC has put out a new tool for communities to measure and consider guidance, both for the individuals and for the community in terms of COVID precaution. COVID-19 community levels is the name of that tool, and it essentially works to minimize the impact of severe COVID-19 illness on the health and on the community, as compared to some of the other older measures, which simply look at transmission or rate of infections in the community. So this new guidance very much is a focus on the severity and the burden of that severity, of disease severity, on our community and on our healthcare system, which is a reasonable approach to take, given the fact that we're looking at a population which either through vaccination or natural infection has a much higher level of immunity as a community, as a population. Where testing is available, there are therapeutics available. So the CDC, I think rightly so, saw fit to create what is effectively a paradigm shift in how we look at risk at the community setting. And so with that in mind, they created this new measure. It uses admissions of new admissions over total admissions over a 7-day period per 100,000 population. It also uses a percent of hospital beds filled with COVID patients. Again, it's a 7-day average, and then it bifurcates, those measures between population transmissions, which are below 200 cases per 100,000, again over a 7-day rolling average, or above 200 cases per 100,000, again a 7-day average, rolling average. And using that information, they come up with this categorization, or these community levels, either low, which is green, medium, which is yellow, and high, which is red. And of course, corresponding both individual and community recommendations based on those community levels. And of course, as everybody in this virtual room now has probably reviewed this information to some degree and can see very clearly that Tolland County, which is where Mansfield is located, is in the green, is in the best category. And it's also noteworthy that both Windham County and New London County and Hartford County, all the counties surrounding us, are also in the green. And so based on that information, the health district is adjusting our approach to recommendations to our communities accordingly. We still certainly take into consideration both local information, state information. The state guidance is still in place as it pertains to the framework for community response. And I think whenever public health authorities are considering suggestions to communities and individuals, it really needs to be done from a holistic approach, looking at all the information, so individuals and communities can make an informed decision on these types of matters. So I'll leave it there, and be glad to answer any questions and support the upcoming conversation.
Mr. Shakin.
Thanks. Rob, I was hoping that you, to the extent you're comfortable at least, that you could provide some sort of plain understanding definition of what changed at the CDC. So not just that they have, dramatically changed what their guidance has been since the summer, essentially around community level of COVID-19 and what is an acceptable risk, but what are some of the metrics that they are looking at differently now than they were before? And if you know why they're looking a little differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, historically, they were looking at the number of cases over 14 days in a given population, and to make it comparable from one population to the other, they do it as a rate, so per 100,000 people. Now, that was at a time when there was no vaccine, minimal access to testing, minimal access to therapeutics, a low level of immunity in the population, and so it was appropriate to use incidence rates or risk rates in a population as an indication of risk to individuals and organizations within that population. Now, we have, over the course of the past 2 years during the pandemic, we've developed therapeutics, we've developed vaccines. Much of the population is vaccinated, while not as much as, I think many public health officials wish. There's still, nonetheless, through this most recent Omicron surge, a relatively high level of inferred immunity or natural immunity due to the significant number of infections which occurred in our population over the past month. And individuals are better informed about what they need to do to protect themselves. And so the CDC, based on those experiences and those developments, both in therapeutics, in vaccines, and in our understanding that while we'll never achieve, I think at this point everybody understands we'll probably never achieve herd immunity, we're nonetheless in a position to control and better control infection in the community, and which allows us now to focus more sharply on some of the severe outcomes and morbidities that can occur as a result of this. And so that's why the CDC is now using these new matrices, which are the number of new admissions per 100,000 over a total 7-day period, which also uses the percent of hospital beds which are actually occupied with COVID patients. Again, rolling average over 7 days. Plus, still, the indicator that's been used all along, which is number of cases over 14 days, over 7 days per 100,000. Now, I know you asked for me to say it simply, and I wish I could have said it more simply than that. It's unfortunately, I think if I were to kind of wrap it up into a few phrases, we're in a better place now than we were 2 years ago. We know a lot more about this disease than we did 2 years ago. We know we need to focus on the vulnerable, and we need to look more closely at a severe outcome and focus on those to have to do our best to minimize the impact of severe disease on our society. So I hope that answers your question.
I think so. I had read somewhere that part of in addition to a more central focus on hospitalizations, that one of the metrics, the shift in the case count metric that the CDC was looking at, was not the sort of total number of cases each 14-day or 7-day period, but was instead a comparison of the number of new cases for the most recent 7-day period compared to the last one. So essentially to track if you're on an upswing or a downswing. And so, if that is that the case, or so is that
trend? Yeah, you're referring to trending, and trends are still very important. They're not particularly based on my most recent review of the information the CDC put out as highlighted or as weighted as much as it was during just the basic incidence rate metric. It's still there. It's still information. It's valuable. Obviously, a situation in which cases are trending up are much more of a concern than which situations and cases are trending down.
Okay, thanks. And then I have a question about the hospitalization piece, and you may not know the answer to this, but when I have had a chance to dive deeply into how the state reports its hospitalization data, what I believe I have learned is that it is reported by the location of the hospital rather than the location of the person who is going to the hospital, and that in Tolland County, the only hospital is Johnson Memorial in Stafford Springs. And so Tolland County, which has a total of like 55 ICU beds or even fewer, it's a very small hospital that doesn't serve most of Tolland County. So I guess what I'm getting at with all of these questions is trying to
soothsay a little bit what conditions might need to happen in Collin County for us to ever be above the low designation, given the fact that if I got sick with COVID and had to be hospitalized, I would be taken immediately out of this county, either to Wyndham Hospital or to a hospital in Hartford County, depending on my needs. Is there ever a scenario in which our hospitalizations here would, given Johnson Memorial's capacity, would reach a point where the CDC would think about Collin County in a higher than low risk factor?
So you make an interesting point. Let me just clarify that Rockville Hospital is also in Collin County. And also I would what you're I think in some sense referring to is the notion that we've got a small inventory of beds within Collin County, and so that could work a couple of ways. It may create a more volatile outcome in terms of new admissions per 100,000. So as maybe that number, or maybe that indicator won't be as reliable because of the small number of beds, but that also could mean that it could be triggered, the percent number of beds covered or occupied by a COVID patient could be triggered sooner rather than later because of the small number of beds. But the other thing I would also add is that one thing we've always done in public health, and when looking at data and trying to assess public health situation, is look at all the data. You know, I've always said, the smaller the population, the more volatile the indicators, and which was always a problem when the state put together the town response framework for individual towns. I mean, it only took a couple of families with COVID, with infections to tip the scales on an individual town from orange to red. That's why larger populations, more stable population to gauge some of these risks from, which is also why we should be looking at the counties next to us, and when we're considering recommendations for communities within Collin County, which is also why I noted that New London, Wyndham, and Hartford counties are also in the green, or the lowest level for our area. And so that will always, I think, be the case moving forward with this new guidance. We'll be looking at not just Collin County, but all the counties around us.
Thanks, that's helpful. I mean, I'm telegraphing the next agenda items a little bit, but I want to I think the caller earlier made some good points that I agree with about us being sort of clear about what metrics we're looking at and would look at in the future if case counts rose again, to reinstate non-pharmaceutical interventions in town. So that's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to cut through the Gordian knot here a little bit. A number of people have asked us to lift the mask mandate. Rob, is there any reason for us not to lift the mask mandate tonight?
Well, based on the new information from the CDC and most recent data available that my office looked at, I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that.
I have had conversations with the chairman of the two boards, the Mansfield board and the E.O. Smith board. In both cases, they say they need some time to adjust to returning to normal, to removing some of the mitigation strategies, and they need parents and teachers to adjust and to figure out how they're going to manage this. So I think both of them have set dates for lifting the mandate in mid-March or somewhere close to that. I think that the way is open for us to lift the town mandate tonight, or to authorize Mr. Aylesworth to lift the mandate tonight, unless unless Mr. Miller has any objection. I mean, we have said all along that we will follow the science and we will follow your recommendation. So you see no reason not to do this.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other council member have a question for Mr. Miller? Mr. Osberger.
Just briefly, Rob, did you say that our area, our county was in orange?
The town of Mansfield, through the State Department of Public Health town response COVID response framework is technically in the orange. That's correct.
Oh, okay, so the county.
No, it's the town of Mansfield town response
okay.
framework.
Oh, thanks for that clarification.
You're welcome.
And the rate per 100,000 is 10.9 as of today for Mansfield.
As of the 19th of February, all the town level data is reported out on a weekly basis, so it's always a little bit delayed. It's a bit older.
But in any case, we are 9/10 of a case above the blue level. So we're very close to to the lower one, and probably this next week it'll come down again. So
I would agree with that, Madam Mayor.
We are really doing extraordinarily well. And by the way, we really need to give thanks to UConn for its enforcement and its vaccination policies and its quarantining, because Mansfield would be in much different shape if it had not been for half of our population being guaranteed to have been covered, and probably the part of the population which is most likely to gather and most likely to transmit. So as we move forward, I think we need to acknowledge that. Any other questions, Mr. Kotchenberger?
Thanks. Just to clarify right before Charlie's question, Rob, in response to the mayor, when you said you would agree with that, I think you mean there isn't a reason to keep the mask mandate. Was that there? I just want to make sure that.
Let me be clear. If the council chose to lift the mask mandate tonight, I would support that decision.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any further questions? All right. Well, thank you once again, Mr. Miller, for your contributions, your careful explanations. We have really benefited from your expertise. I would assume that we will continue to check in with you, because if things change, things will change. This has clearly always been a moving target, and it will continue to be a moving target.
Completely agree, Mayor.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We can move on to the next item, which is the status of local authorities relative to mandating masks. Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Mayor. As I kind of started off by saying before Rob gave his report, there's obviously been a lot of change happening over a compressed period of time. Even when the agenda item summary that's contained in this packet was published on Friday, things were playing out on Friday that this didn't capture. And while I considered potentially issuing a modified agenda item summary, given this new information, I knew we would be discussing it tonight and didn't want to confuse the matter. So based on these new metrics, based on the guidance that we're getting from our public health subject matter experts at all levels, from the CDC at the federal level on down to Rob and his team at the local level, it certainly seems, in my view, that it would be the right time to move forward with rescinding the existing mask mandate in the town of Mansfield. I think we've hit the proverbial metrics that we need to at this point. And as Deputy Mayor Shaken, said, and I think you've said, it's been the council's sort of practice to try to adhere to the best available guidance from our public health experts, including the CDC. And so certainly in keeping, being consistent with that, it would seem that it would not be advisable to further delay lifting the existing mask mandate at this time. And so for the purposes of discussion, while Rob was talking, I prepared a modified motion for the council to consider. I'm putting that in the chat right now.
Mr. Shaken?
I don't see any reason to belabor the point any further, so I'd like to make the motion and we can debate it. I move to express formal support for the town manager to rescind the existing indoor face covering mandate for public spaces in Mansfield effective tomorrow.
Is there a second to Mr. Shaken's motion? Mr. Osberger seconds. Mr. Shaken, speak to your motion.
Sure. So we've been sort of on an island here in Mansfield. We instituted indoor mask mandate for our public spaces, our retail spaces, etc., back in August. And we did so because Rob recommended, given the rising Delta variant and its vaccine resistance, that we do so. And unlike many municipalities who did so then, who then lifted the mandate and then reinstated it for Omicron, and then several weeks ago lifted that mandate, we've decided, I think, as a council, to try to do our best to resist the politics around COVID-19 and to follow what public health advice we have gotten from Rob, who has done a very good job throughout this pandemic of being a good public health civil servant and translating the advice of the epidemiologists at the Department of Public Health and at the Centers for Disease Control. And so that advice has changed, and it's changed because the facts of COVID have changed. It's changed for all the reasons Rob just laid out. And I think the only way, frankly, for us to continue to battle the pandemic, regardless of politics, is to continue to follow Rob's advice. And so that means if there's another variant of COVID in the summer, like Delta last year, that is dangerous in a new and different way we could not have conceived, we may need to come back and go back to masking. We may need to do other things. This is not the end forever, but necessarily. Hopefully it is. But for now, I think it is the advice of the CDC. It's logical, at least, and I think we ought to do it. I will say, just to back up what the mayor said a few minutes ago, I think it's entirely proper, as speaking as a citizen, for the school districts to take a couple weeks to amend their policies. I just want folks who may not have children in the schools on the call to know, like, it's not just about mask wearing. It's about a lot of other things that have changed about the day to day, and the schools have been operating this way for a year and a half. I think it's entirely proper for them to take a week or two, if they want to work out new policies and procedures. They've been having lunch in the classrooms. They haven't been using the cafeteria. They've been doing mask breaks outdoors, a number of things that could change if situation changes. And I think it's also fair to parents who may not be comfortable making this change as suddenly as the CDC has made it, to make difficult decisions about what they want to do with their kids, and for teachers to make decisions about what they want to do with their teaching. So I hope that folks in the audience who are listening, who are expecting the Board of Ed to be exactly the way the town is, to understand that they have the ability to make their own decision, and that I think their decision also makes sense for their particular situation, just as I think this makes sense for Big Y and the other spaces that we regulate. So I hope you all will support it, and I hope this is the last time we have to talk about mandating masks in any facility. But unfortunately, I fear that next winter will bring similar concerns, and we may be in this situation for a few more years. But for now, we are feeling safer, and for me at least, that means taking advantage of these times to go out and do things that I haven't been comfortable doing when there's more COVID in the community, and enjoying our restaurants and other things indoors. So thank you all.
Mr. Coleman, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Now that we're in the process of lifting our mask mandates, do we need a separate motion for the council to have public meetings again?
That's next on our agenda. That comes up in a minute. I want to ask Mr. Miller a question. Is clearly lifting the mandate allows people who wish to remain masked to remain masked. And the CDC guidelines do say that immunocompromised people and some seniors as well, I think, should be wearing masks. But I think the guidance on masks has changed as well. Would you comment on that?
Sure. If it's essential as part of this new approach that individuals that either choose or are recommended by their healthcare provider to wear a mask be fully supported, and because for many individuals, either because of preference or because of immunocompromised or otherwise compromised condition, it's important and critical for them to continue to wear masks. And so I suspect that there'll be quite a few masks remaining for some time to come within our community. The guidance has modified a little bit. I haven't looked at it in depth, but I do know that the CDC amongst the mask guidance is recognizing that that there are masks with varying degrees of protection, not only in terms of source control, but also in terms of protecting those individuals. And they do provide that information in their website with regards to guidance on masks for the general public.
Mr. Shaken?
Can I beg your indulgence to ask your question in a more direct way, Tony?
Sure.
Rob, I understand that we had this conversation a few weeks ago, just for folks who are still concerned, who may be concerned about walking into a Big Y without 80% of people wearing masks the way it was this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And having done some shopping in other communities, I can tell you we're an island. This isn't happening elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about the effectiveness of a properly fitted N95 mask at stopping COVID molecules or stopping infection, essentially?
Yeah, sure. So what Councilman Shaken's referring to is what's commonly known as an N95 mask, but it's really considered a respirator. It's typically used in an occupational healthcare setting, and for it to be properly used in occupational healthcare setting, it needs to be fit tested so that a tight seal can be established and determined to exist on an individual. And if it does exist and it is tested appropriately, then it literally filters out up to 95% of particles down to a particular micron size. I don't know what that particular micron size is, but that's where the number 95 comes from. Now, whether or not that kind of mask is appropriate from somebody from the general public is something you really need to talk to your healthcare provider about, because it's really designed for an occupational setting, for individuals who can actually handle something being sealed to their face, in effect. That being said, an N95 mask can still be a protective, even if it's not fit tested, for somebody from the general public. It could still be worn by anybody from the general public, and it's still generally considered more protective of those for that individual than, say, a procedural mask, a cloth face mask, or even a KN95 mask. So if you want to wear an N95 mask to gain more protection, then you can do that. I don't know if there was something else there, Ben, you wanted me to discuss.
Are people warning people against wearing the traditional 3-layer cloth masks?
Well, that does bring up one point. Because of the tightness of an N95 mask, you don't necessarily want, there's definitely some individuals that probably shouldn't wear them. And so you really want it, whether it's a young child or somebody with COPD or other breathing issues. Those N95 masks probably aren't appropriate for them, and you really want to talk to your healthcare provider, I think, if to make sure that that's something that can work for you. Now, as far as some of the other loose fitting masks, just like with anything, Madam Mayor, it's really all about, you know, how many layers there are and how tightly it fits, whether it's over the nose or the face. A lot of that is common sense in terms of it's over the nose and the face, you got multiple layers and it's tightly fitting, is going to be much more protective of both you and the people around you than something that's single layer, loosely fitting and over just your mouth.
Thank you. All right, there is a motion on the floor. Further comments about the motion? Are we ready to vote? Is there anybody who wishes to abstain from this motion? Is there anybody who wishes to vote in the negative? Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, I think we have adopted this motion unanimously. Thank you, one and all. We really have held tough on this process. It's been pretty much unanimous all the way through, and I'm really grateful to all the members of the council for being so supportive of our public safety and health matters. And let's cross our fingers and hope we don't have to go back. Okay, thank you. The next item is resuming council and council committees in-person meetings. Mr. Aylesworth.
Well, first, Madam Mayor, I just want to say, in anticipation of this possible outcome from your last vote, we do have some community outreach that'll be going out here shortly. So we'll be pushing that out so people know how things change at midnight tonight. But obviously, one thing kind of builds on the next, and there's been discussion, I think, all along about tying kind of the plan for resuming in-person meetings with obviously what was going on with COVID, but also what the latest guidance was with respect to face masks. So for all the reasons we don't need to I guess rehash, for all the same reasons that were discussed in terms of where things stand and the merits behind lifting the mask order. It seems that resuming in-person meetings, if that's the council's will and desire, would make sense to look to do that next month.
Do we need a motion to do that?
I think it would be good to state your intent publicly so there's no confusion about what's going on.
Now, according to the materials you've provided for us, the state will permit us to do hybrid meetings. So if anybody wishes to participate in a meeting from home, particularly staff members who are only required to be part of the meeting for a brief period of time, to lift the rule for in-person against in-person meetings means that we will probably proceed to a hybrid form. Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Coleman, followed by Mr. Osberger.
Unless there's substantive questions, I'd like to make the motion and we can debate it. So I will do that. Move to have the town council and council committees resume hybrid or in-person meetings beginning on March 14th, 2022, which is the date of our next meeting. And this is what's in your packet. I will add to this motion now slowly that for council committees, the decision to hold the meeting in person or virtually will be up to the committee chair.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Osberger. Mr. Shaken, to your motion.
This is an extension. If we don't need masks indoors anymore, according to the CDC, I think that was the justification we had for continuing these meetings remotely. So it's prudent for us to go back to doing them in person. I think it would be also prudent for the town manager to explore whether there are, as part of the reopening, sort of full reopening of town buildings, whether there are other mitigation things that he would recommend for us. And I hope he would bring those recommendations to us if there are things like negative testing for unvaccinated folks prior to meetings or something like that, other public space restrictions that might make sense. But for the purposes of our meetings, I think it makes sense to do them in person. I also, however, feel pretty strongly that we need to continue to allow for remote participation in our meetings, both for counselors and staff, as Tony mentioned, but also for members of the public, especially people who may need some time to be comfortable being out in public for some time. And so I know we've invested in the hybrid technology; it works, and so I just want to make sure we continue to make it available for public comment, especially, but also for anything else. If a counselor is sick, remote things have become the norm, and it's one of the things that I think will be with us for a long time after the pandemic. And so we need to try to be accommodating of it as a council, recognizing that it's much easier for someone with an opinion to hop on a Zoom for 5 minutes than it is for them to make their way down to the council chambers at a time that is normally associated with dinner or bedtime for small kids. So I hope we'll continue to make that available. And finally, that for all of our different advisory committees who are staffed by interested volunteers from town, that we ought to continue for as long as we possibly can to allow them to meet remotely, because I believe it's much more convenient for most people who are looking to get involved.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak to this motion? Mr. Coleman, followed by Mr. Osberger.
I have a comment on the hybrid technology. First of all, I agree with Ben on the committees and the volunteers should be able to participate remotely. I think that's a great idea. But my comment really is about the hybrid technology. I don't know if anybody watched the last Board of Education meeting, which was a hybrid meeting. I couldn't hear the people in the council chambers. So I think that needs to be addressed. Could someone look into that, please?
Yeah, we'll certainly have our IT staff. I mean, they've equipped the room with superior monitors and cameras. They've done a lot of sound testing. I know I was a part of that. If there's an issue, something that's cropped up in recent weeks, we'll certainly get that addressed.
Mr. Osberger?
Yeah, I would have to agree with Ben Shaken's situation in this motion, and it does present itself something that we could definitely use in the future. I would also add that it would probably help us when we have inclement weather, snowstorms and such, where we could still hold our meetings.
Mr. Shaken, followed by Mr. Katzenberger.
Thanks for the second time, just to mention that we are only given this authority by statute, right? We can only meet remotely based on executive order and then a law that the legislature passed last year that has an expiration date. So this all may go away, but I believe there is some legislation being proposed this year that would make permanent, remote participation in municipal government, basically. But it hasn't passed yet. So we may be forced to change if the legislature takes no action at some point in the future. But hopefully that bill will pass so that we can modernize some of these functions.
Mr. Katzenberger.
Thanks. I absolutely support the motion. I am not I don't know if it's optimistic or pessimistic, however you want to look at it, as Ben is about how this will work out in the future. We'll see. But I think it's striking that, and I was thinking about this before the motion ever came up earlier this morning, this evening, how few people have taken advantage of the opportunity to call in on Zoom for public comment. I mean, it's not just a few, it's almost none. This is the first time I can remember in months, perhaps, in which anyone's come in, as opposed to in person. So, and we're in 2 years of this, so the technology is not difficult. I'm not sure that's the reason. We'll see. But I think, so I am in favor of hybrid, but I think we may be underestimating both people's desire to be in person as well as the perception of effectiveness when they are. But having said that, again, I certainly support
them. Anybody else? Are we ready to vote? We know we're voting on? Okay, is there anybody who wishes to abstain? Is there anybody who wishes to vote in the negative? The motion is adopted unanimously. Thank you, one and all. And once again, my thank you for being unanimous on this. It makes it a lot easier and a lot more credible when we do things like this together. All right, the next item on our agenda is the American Rescue Plan. Oh, before we move on, I want to ask one quick question. If we are meeting in person, can we take down the plexiglass between members of the council, or do we have to keep that kind of mitigation in place?
Yes, I'm not sure that I'm familiar with the plexiglass that you're referring to. You're saying at one point that there was plexiglass installed on the tables?
Yes, between.
Okay. I think when we briefly resumed in-person meetings, which seems like forever ago, but during my time, I don't recall there being any sort of plexiglass dividers at that point. So I'll confer with Rob, but I would think, Madam Mayor, that, aside from perhaps, trying to be mindful of spacing and that sort of thing, that it would look like a pretty regular meeting.
You've forgotten the trauma of your first.
I haven't forgotten my interview process and the glass box I was put in, but
well, we were in glass boxes too. So, Mr. Ausberger.
I've been holding my town committee meetings in council chamber since October, and there hasn't been any plexiglass there.
Okay. Good. It will be great to see everybody. All right. American Rescue Plan funding. This is simply a motion to set a public hearing. I don't think we are expected to debate the proposals that have been before us. Mr. Aylesworth.
Yeah, I guess. So just to rehash from last meeting, revised proposals were presented to the council. There was an agreement, I think, at the last meeting that you all would independently or individually look over the proposals and provide feedback to me relative to those projects that you thought were either A, most essential, or B, most easy to implement in the immediate term, or both. I did hear back from a few council members. Thank you for those that I did hear back from. I didn't hear back from everybody. And I did want to just, I guess, briefly provide an update on that front, which is, and I'll actually do a quick share screen here if you bear with me. So not to rehash everything, but if you bear with me. Okay. All right, so this was a slide that was presented towards the end of the last presentation. This shows the categories of things that our roughly $7.5 million that I was proposing, how those funds be allocated. And then based on the council member feedback that I did receive, this list, this tables, I should say, those that have a bar or a line through them are those that did not receive from any council members that responded any nod that they felt that this was either a top priority, or B, could be immediately implemented. That doesn't mean that these aren't going to move forward, aren't going to be funded. They just were identified by council members as sort of those that I guess, I don't know if you want to call it low-hanging fruit, but those that there was, in their mind, easy consensus around. And so I'll just flag those here now because it might be hard to read with the line through it. One was the social services mobile support vehicle for $60,000. So that was one that seems to warrant additional discussion. Another was the arts relief fund in the amount of $75,000. The cubicle partitions for the community center, as well as virtual programming equipment for the community center, were another couple. And those were smaller dollars. Those were like $6,500 and $5,000 respectively. Hunting Lodge Road neighborhood plan, in the amount of $150,000. And then finally, this did actually receive some support from those that responded to me, but I haven't crossed it out. But it seems that additional discussion around the public water system service to Mansfield Middle School. And this is based, I guess, on some of the read that I've gotten from the last meeting as well as subsequent to the last meeting. I don't know that there's necessarily consensus around that particular one. So just to summarize here, of the roughly $7.5 million, it seems that there's general consensus around about $6 million of those items. And again, that's not including the $1.25 million public water system extension project to service Mansfield Middle School. If that project were to be included, basically we're talking about everything, all but a few $100,000 of what was proposed, there would be consensus on. And the last thing I just wanted to add was, because I know this came up in discussion at the last meeting with the council, and that was questions or concerns about the piping that's internal to Mansfield Middle School, and specifically questions raised about lead and lead solder in the joints and issues we've had at some of the other schools, and how converting to a public water system doesn't solve that problem. You'd have to address that sort of separate or regardless of what you do with a public or private water supply. And so I just want to say that the one modification I've made to these proposals since the last meeting is to broaden the scope of the Mansfield Middle School project to include upgrades to existing interior piping in the amount of $250,000, $250,000 to address that. I'm not proposing more money from Rescue Plan because I believe that additional money will be able to come from other sources, i.e. federal infrastructure grants. So it doesn't increase the ARPA investment. But I did want to make sure that for those that were concerned about that after talking with facilities and kind of ruminating on it a bit, I think there's consensus that we would want to do more than just bring public water service to the middle school. We would also want to do those interior piping upgrades so there wasn't any concern about lead leaching into the water down the road as those pipes degrade a bit more. So I'll stop there. It looks like Deputy Mayor Shaken already has his hand up.
Mr. Shaken. Can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Ben. How about now?
Yes.
I'm a little confused. What are we having a public hearing on? I thought the conversation at our February 15th meeting was that we were going to have a public hearing on the projects that there seemed to be consensus based on that meeting from the council that they would like to move forward and that we're ready to go. I'm a little concerned through no fault of anyone's that some of these things that you just detailed with the middle school seem to continue to sort of shift around a little bit in terms of the scope of the project. And we still haven't gotten sort of implementation details about any of the pieces, but it sounds like what instead we're holding a hearing on is almost the entire allocation based on any piece that any one counselor has flagged as something they would like to see move forward.
So the purpose of the public hearing would be it would be a public hearing on the quote unquote draft or preliminary, whatever you want to call it, rescue plan, funding plan. We have an obligation, and if Charmaine's on this meeting, perhaps she wants to chime in here, but my understanding is that our obligation for the April 30th deadline, the reporting deadline that I've mentioned previously, is Treasury is requiring us to have a plan for how we plan to spend the entirety of our first tranche of funding. So we, like other towns and cities, are receiving our rescue plan funds in two tranches. We got our first tranche last summer. So we got 50% of our $7.5 million. It's about $3.77 or $3.78 million. And so as of April 30th, we have to submit a plan. The town has to submit a plan as has gone through a public hearing process, as I understand it, to demonstrate our plans for that first half of the total amount. There's no need, obviously if the council is prepared to do it, you can. There's no requirement, so to speak, to go beyond that. But there does need to be a plan in place We don't need implementation details, but there needs to be some level of detail, probably as much detail as already has been compiled in the project summary justification document that I've circulated, which is kind of an executive summary. That could, we believe, be the basis for the report, as well as, information that could be repackaged for the public hearing that would be noticed in advance of the 14th. But that's basically, what we have to do now.
Mr. Coleman.
Yes, I think really for the first chunk of money, the $3.7 million, I think we should take the time and formulate an actual plan before the public hearing.
We're running up against calendar issues here that concerns me. I mean, if we present a plan for almost $6 million, then clearly there's actionable items within it that would come up to the 3.78 or 3.77 that Mr. Ryan has referred to as the first tranche. But we might be able to discern from the public hearing which projects the public believes should go first. But I think whatever happens, we do need to present some proposals to a public hearing and get some response on them. Mr. Coleman.
I think we're going to need a few special meetings in there to accomplish this.
Yes, I agree.
I would feel better if we had a better set plan before the public hearing, and maybe we can have a special meeting.
Mr. Shaken.
I don't know that we need another special meeting. I guess if the idea is to show the public, to ask for the public's feedback at a hearing for the sort of full breadth of what Ryan has presented us as recommendations, that would make sense. We've had them. The public has heard us discuss them, ask questions, gotten detail. If the purpose is to present the public with a percentage of them that the council is ready to move forward on and get the public's feedback about whether our allocating those resources and beginning to spend them is a good idea or not, then I agree with Mr. Coleman. I don't know that, I mean, I thought after the 15th we had settled on a few consensus items to move forward with immediately, but I'm now seeing that we have settled on almost all of the allocation based on interest of individual counselors, and there's things certainly within that list that don't seem ready to go tomorrow. If we've said, yes, go tonight, I don't think we're ready to spend dollars on most of those things tomorrow. So if the purpose is A, then I have no issue holding a hearing and getting feedback. It'll be one of, I'm sure, many opportunities for the public to provide it throughout our process. But I thought after the 15th, the idea was for us to having identified a handful of things that were important that needed to get moving now, that we get the public's input on those things and then begin moving on them.
How about we do two things, that there's a list that we all agree on that we can go forward with right away, and then a list of what comes next and is still up for grabs.
Well, again, I guess, so there's a few different ways to slice and dice and different ways we can approach the public hearing. I don't want to lose focus on the fact that we do have a requirement as part of a report that goes in at the end of April to at least speak to what our plans are, the council's plans are for half of the funding. So whether we, you go exactly that far and stop there, that's obviously, well within the council's purview to decide what you want to do. I'm just want to make sure everybody's clear that if hypothetically there was easy made consensus on, let's say $1.5 million of the overall $7.5 million hole, that wouldn't be adequate from the Treasury standpoint. They want to know what you're doing with $3.78 million. And so just want to make sure everybody's on the same page there.
Mr. Coleman.
Where does the middle school water project, is that a number one priority? Is that something that's going to be the part of the first portion of the money?
Well, the total that I provided didn't include any, basically did not include that. So the $6 million, roughly $6 million figure, set that aside for additional discussion.
Thank you.
So the motion being proposed is to set a public hearing. Would somebody make that motion, please, so we can discuss it? Mr. Bruder? You want to read the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I move effective February 28th, 2022 to schedule a public hearing on the town of Mansfield's proposed uses of its American Rescue Plan Act ARPA funding allocation for Monday, March 14th, 2022 at 7:05 p.m. If a change in public date is needed, the town manager is authorized to revise the date provided council members are polled and available on the new date, and the town clerk is advised of the new date prior to the deadline for advertising the public hearing.
Is there a second? Ms. Berthelot seconds?
And just to speak in favor of my motion, Mayor,
Yes.
and I think some of this has already been discussed, but a public hearing is going to be useful, and I think that it'll help us move forward in this process.
Anybody else wish to comment? Mr. Bruder.
I'm seeing in the chat that the motion I made should be for 7 p.m., not 7:05.
It was not your fault. it was included errantly in the package. It should say 7 o'clock.
Okay, I'd like to amend my motion to reflect the 7 o'clock p.m.
Okay, so then on our agenda, it would be a call to order, the hearing immediately to follow, and then we go back to our regular agenda.
Please.
Okay, Mr. Osberger.
And this being on the 14th, this will truly be an in-person public meeting.
Yes. Yep. Any other questions? Mr. Coleman.
I can support this motion. This is going to be more of a public information gathering of what the citizens want. Are we presenting the plan for this motion? I mean, for this public hearing?
Yeah, so
It's just the proposal.
Okay.
We haven't finalized anything yet.
Okay. I would like to see that to gather information from the citizens, to see what they really want.
Okay. Are we ready to vote? Is there anybody who wishes to abstain? Is there anybody who wishes to vote in the negative? Then I rule we have voted unanimously to set a public hearing. All right. Now, Mr. Matoma, who has been extraordinarily patient through at least 3 meetings, thank you very much for being here, and would you like to present the report from the Human Rights Commission?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, council members. I know you've had a long night, so we'll be as efficient as we can. But I do want to say that the members of the Human Rights Commission felt strongly as we adopted this report this year that we share it with you as part of an agenda item, that you have chances to ask questions, and that the general public tuning in tonight be allowed to see the work that's been done. So I appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to share my screen briefly. I'm joined by the Vice Chair, Jane Freed, here as well, who will jump in. We'll go quickly as an overview of some of the items contained in our report, and then I'd be happy to hear any questions or thoughts from council members. But let me see if I can share this really quickly. So we submitted our annual report right on the eve of Human Rights Day 2021 to the town manager's office. I know it was included in your communications packet for an earlier meeting, and I appreciate the opportunity to have this on the agenda for your meeting tonight. Hopefully you had a chance to review it. The members for 2021 of the Human Rights Commission, you can see there. They've been an active and committed group, meeting regularly, monthly, as well as in subcommittee meetings, and taking seriously the charge of this new commission. And I've really been, quite honored to serve alongside them, and their dedication and the work reflected here really is a broader group effort on the part of, for a group for whom this is, for many of them, their first service to the town. So it's been an experience that they've all, I think, been grateful for, but has provided an on-ramp for engaging their community in new ways. I also want to give a quick thanks and shout out to some non-members who have been critical to our work, including staff members, Monica Ferrara, Margaret Chady, and Katie Bell, who've just been absolutely tremendous in the support of our work, taken an interest and taken this work on for themselves personally, and we certainly couldn't have done what we've done without them. We've also been very fortunate to have two interns from E.O. Smith, Derek Cameron and Felicia Famularo, who have been with us since the summer, contributing much needed insight, energy, and expertise. Again, much of their work targeted particularly around the survey, which we'll talk about later. It's been a wonderful way, again, to have young people involved in the work of our commission and really to begin to familiarize themselves with the town. We've also been grateful to have actually a full member, Livia Daggett, served last year from the high school, and that continues this year as well, after Olivia had to step down in order to attend college outside of Mansfield. I also want to extend a special thanks to Pamela Peters, a Mansfield resident, a PhD student at the University of Connecticut, who assisted us in the analysis of our findings from the survey, and her expertise was much valued and appreciated in that work. Just to remind you all of our charge that you gave us, we were formed in 2020 with the mission to promote the implementation of universal human rights and values and principles in the town of Mansfield and the broader Northeast Connecticut community. We take as our basis the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the globally recognized standard articulation of human rights. And we do that through 6 different types of activities. And I'm going to go through the presentation here with some examples of our work in each one of these for the remainder of this presentation. So in the area of providing human rights education over the course of 2021, we engaged in a range of activities. Some of the highlights include the proposal and adoption of Indigenous Peoples Day as a town recognized holiday, which included the creation of a website that included information regarding the town's Indigenous history, as well as resources for learning opportunities of members of the public to engage in around Indigenous and Native peoples' history and contemporary lives. We were also proud to support Mansfield's ongoing recognition of Pride Month within our town, and we'll continue to do that as well to highlight our inclusive and welcoming stance toward all gender identities, sexual orientations, and every one of our town residents. Finally, we also participated in the Celebrate Mansfield Festival with our own booth, where we provided an opportunity to engage the public at large with the mission of the Human Rights Commission and a number of activities. We've also been proactive in human rights efforts. These have included actively advocating or highlighting the human rights impacts of the closure of Wyndham Hospital's maternity services, along with a number of other impacted communities in the greater Wyndham area. Hartford Healthcare ultimately did decide to close those services, but they have recently, as of a couple of weeks ago, been hit with a fine from the state for not abiding by appropriate procedure. So we feel like while the outcome wasn't the one we wanted, we were active in highlighting the concerns that the closure of these services, these important services, would have on marginalized communities in our greater region. We've also made recommendations for how to address human rights violations, and I'll just highlight one that was recently prominent. Of course, we were asked by the town council to address the question of resettlement of Afghan refugees, which you subsequently adopted a resolution in support, but also went beyond that. And recently, we also recommended at the time that the town engage the organization Welcoming America in a broader-based campaign to make the town more welcoming to newcomers of all sorts. And I'm glad to say that through the good offices of Mr. Aylesworth, Mansfield is now a part of the 2022 cohort for the Rural Welcoming Initiative there, and we're excited to see the results of that engagement. Ensure active public participation. A couple of things to highlight here. I'll just highlight the first one and then hand it over to my vice chair, Jane Freed. The first, of course, you see every day as you come into town hall is the design and execution of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Mural that was part of the wider statewide campaign. So the commission, as you all know, took a leading role in the organization of this public art project as a vehicle for engaging the broader community. And we had a number of stakeholders from across the town, as well as in the broader Northeast Connecticut community, participate in the conceptualization, funding, design, and execution of this work, as well as its unveiling. And we hope began to have more active public participation in our work and in the work of advancing human rights. The second major accomplishment in this area was the design and fielding of a survey, which the report has some detailed findings in, but let me turn it over to Jane now to talk a little bit about those pieces.
You're still muted.
Thank you, Glenn. The hour is late, and I'm going to run through this fairly quickly because you all have been incredibly patient, and I'm sure you want to be finished. So let me summarize. I am delighted that we did this survey because we do have some data about how people feel about living in Mansfield, and it's a starting point, and we know it's only a starting point, but I think it's the first time anybody's ever asked a whole bunch of different people, how do you feel about living here, and do you believe that your human rights have been, are typically respected in the town of Mansfield? Do you feel welcome? Are you happy to be here? And I have good news for you. Mansfield is an absolutely wonderful place to live, according to 66 2/3% of the population. So Mansfield is a wonderful, respectful place to live if you are white, born in the United States, a native speaker of English, able-bodied, heterosexual, participating in what is typically considered a traditional family, have a master's degree, a family income of over $75,000. If you fall in that group, you are a happy person to live here. And we were delighted to find out that so many people were happy to live here and felt that they'd never been disrespected or badly treated. But the purpose of the Human Rights Commission is to find out who doesn't feel that way. And so we have approximately 33% of people here who fall out of one or more of those categories. And what I want to focus on is the fact that the town, at the time that is appropriate, needs to address those issues in some form. And we are already addressing several of them by collaborating with other organizations that have a much narrower focus. Glitch, it's not exactly a glitch in the survey, but an issue in the survey is that we only had, and I did write this number down anyway, we had around 260 people responded to the survey in a town of 10,000. So that clearly, for anybody who knows statistics, is not a statistically reliable sample, but is nevertheless very useful to point out where we need to look for more issues. Excuse me, I just found the numbers, 231 people. And the other part of the problem was that it was distributed to communities, to people who live in Mansfield or have children in the Mansfield schools. And because the parents who live in Ashford and send their kids to E.O. Smith High School don't live in Mansfield, they were not included in this. So the next time we do such a survey, we will have to be more diligent in getting it out, getting a higher response level, and getting it to Ashford. So here are the big issues from the people who don't feel like this is the world's heaven on earth. Affordable housing, public transport, mental health services, compliance with ADA regulations, and translators for people for whom English is not their primary language. And we have Pamela Peters, who did our breakout, gave us some very useful ways to look at that. And if you look at the report, you'll see the pie charts and you'll see how many people. The heaviest emphasis was affordable housing and public transport, and those two things are interconnected. Then the ability to get to mental health services depends on where you live and how you get there. People who can't get on a bus can't get any place, and people particularly in town hall and in the public schools, if they don't feel comfortable with English, must have a translator, and we have not to this date provided a sufficient number of translators. So those are the big issues that are on the human rights agenda. We are collaborating with the Desegregated Connecticut group, and people have been attending their meetings to find out more about what we need to do related to affordable housing, of course, and it's in the Mansfield long-term plan, and we all know the history of where we are going with that. So we are addressing the housing issue. From my point of view, the biggest problem in Mansfield is you can't get a job if you don't have a master's degree, and that seems to be a really big issue. It's perfectly understandable, but to achieve a decent level of lifestyle here and not work at the university is a somewhat difficult thing to do. So that's another issue. I'm not sure we should be thinking about doing anything about that, but that came out loud and clear. So that was all stuff that we had as quantitative data. We have one other piece of information that is qualitative data that we need to struggle with how to address, and that is people in the qualitative portion of the summary talked about tokenism and elitism in the town of Mansfield. You know, we're happy to have you here, but we don't want to talk to you, is what that comes down to. And that is much more amorphous, and yet it's profoundly important because it relates to the level of trust in the community. So one of the things that we are going to do next year is to begin a series of online conversations among members of various groups in the community around the issues that we think are important and then showed up in this survey. So the first one that's on the agenda is, who are the faith communities in Mansfield and do they relate to each other? We have somebody who will chair that, and we will have to get some people together, and then we will put that one online. The second one will be ADA access. And what are we doing about transportation for people who have difficulty accessing public transportation? Those are the only two that have been planned so far, but there are several others. And our format for doing this is we will pick an issue that we know is important and then put together a diverse panel of people so that they can talk about the issue from their own personal perspective and their cultural perspective. And when we do that, we will hope to open conversations between communities that normally don't have a whole lot to do with each other. So that's on our agenda for next year. And it's also connected to the whole Welcoming America initiative, because we can't welcome people who we don't know and we don't know how to talk to. So we're going to be working on that. We have had consistent meetings of the entire Human Rights Commission, the Outreach and Education section subcommittee, and the Town Charter subcommittee. And those committee meetings have all been open to the public. So we will continue to do that. We will continue, and next year we have intended to ramp up our efforts to invite people to come and make comments and to make the agenda public further in advance of the meeting so that we can begin to solicit more information from people whose best interest might be served by our committee. The charge to this committee is somewhat amorphous. It took us a while to figure out exactly what we were hoping to accomplish because it's so huge. But I feel like we've now focused on a number of very important projects and we are moving forward with optimism and enthusiasm. And that is the end of my report.
Right.
And I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Jane. So yes, we'll end on that. Our last, requirement is to be publicly accountable for human rights progress, which is why we're here tonight. So happy to field questions or comments.
Are there questions for Mr. Matoma or Ms. Freed? Mr. Coleman.
Yes. First of all, I want to thank you for all your work. This is regards to Hartford Healthcare closing Wyndham Hospital maternity ward and all the effects it has on the community. You said that the outcome wasn't what you were looking for. Does that put an end to this, to this issue? Or what's next?
It doesn't put an end to the work of the commission to advocate to ensure a right to health on the part of our community members, of which access to appropriate maternity care services is one. I think, the decision by a private healthcare provider to close maternity services is not one that we can directly remedy either through the commission or even through the town council. So we'll continue to work in partnership with other members of the community who organize to oppose this, to continue to pressure Hartford Healthcare to ensure that access is provided. What avenues there are, I'm not sure, and we'll have to continue to follow up. I think the state fine recently is one likely to be absorbed by Hartford Healthcare as the cost of doing business, unfortunately. And so we'll have to continue to organize in that field.
I'd like to just add to that. One of the big problems of delivering children outside of our community is transportation, because frequently women who expect to deliver in the hospital, in Wyndham Hospital, don't have transportation in Manchester or Norwich, which are the two places that they're sent. So another alternative might be to look at transport services in the event that somebody's having an emergency, or even a routine transport if the town was able to pay for that, because that's really what the issue is. It's getting the people to the facility if it's outside of our community.
Good point, Jane. Thank you. Also, has the commission done any research or work on the town of Mansfield's hiring practices and meeting Title VII?
We have not.
Would you suggest that we should?
Yeah, sure. Why not? That's a perfect thing to do. Just make sure that we're doing things well in that department. A lot of people, a lot of organizations do look into that.
Thank you.
Let me just throw in one more thing. One of the things we realized as we were looking through all the demographics of this is the vast majority of people whose income is significantly below $75,000 are maintenance workers and cafeteria workers and things like that at UConn. They also happen to be overwhelmingly people of color. So it's a complex and serious issue that has to be disentangled. And looking into that from any angle would be an extremely important human rights issue, because if you can't live near where you work, that's a question. And those people who make that kind of money can't afford to live in this community.
I just want to make sure that our own house is in order.
I mean, clearly the issue about low and moderate income workers at the university is one of the driving forces for our affordability, our housing affordability efforts. It's one of the major arguments that we have made with UConn, that they need affordable housing near campus because they have people who can't afford a McMansion. So, any further questions? Listen, I would like to extend our thanks to you. We have thrown all kinds of issues at this commission over the last couple of years, some of them obviously part of your portfolio and some of them that were not so obviously part of your portfolio, but we have been really gratified by by your quick response, the quality of your responses, and the tremendous work you have done over the past year or two. So I really would like to extend the council's thanks for all of this. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
I just want to echo, oh, sorry, Madam Mayor, I just wanted to echo, and it kind of relates to, some of what Brian may be interested in. I just want to say that, the town regularly benefits from the guidance and expertise and professional insights of Glenn and other members of the HRC. And one of the areas, we're looking to make more progress this coming year is in DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion training and workshops at the staff level. We ran into some snags, I think, trying to find what we thought would be sort of substantive beneficial programming during COVID when everything had gone virtual. And so hopefully now as people start meeting again in person, we can find ways of doing this that kind of bring people like physically into the same room and we can talk about some of these things. But I just want to, publicly express my gratitude with everything Glenn is going on, and he has a lot going on. He always finds the time to offer the insights, so I appreciate that.
Well, I think among these two people, you have some of the best trainers in the state, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, we're pretty good hands with Glenn and Jane and others. So.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you, Johnny.
You're very welcome, and we do look forward to hearing more. And I think every member of the council should feel free to reach out to us if they have concerns or issues or things that they think we can be helpful with. That's what we're here for. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, we will progress on to the service agreement between Mansfield Discovery Depot and the town of Mansfield. Mr. Aylesworth.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The town and Mansfield Discovery Depot have a relationship and a long-standing service agreement, usually 3 years in duration, going back some time now. And it wasn't until I was in place for a while that it was brought to my attention that the most recent agreement had actually expired the end of the 2019-2020 fiscal year. So I believe June 30th, 2020. So we're a little over a year and a half removed from the expiration of the most recent 3-year agreement. And so, once that was brought to my attention, the parties started discussing what the future may have in store. And, not surprisingly, MDD, Mansfield Discovery Depot, is interested in forging a new multi-year agreement. And so we started to have conversations about what that would look like. One of the things that I know, a bug that was put in my ear shortly after I got here was, and this is not something that's new to the council, and I know you're already aware of this, but basically concerns about what I'll call full cost accounting for the services that the town provides Mansfield Discovery Depot. Not to say for a second that there isn't a shared interest in the success of MDD, but at the same time, there's concerns that the full cost, the actual cost of us providing the service was being sort of underreported or underaccounted for in some areas, which basically has the effect of the town subsidizing some things that somebody might rightfully have concern with from the standpoint of a taxpayer. So with that in mind, I sat down with members of the management team that have a role to play in one specific functional area of service that's being provided to Mansfield Discovery Depot. So, finance, facilities, public works, human resources, IT, each of those directors, and ask them to, basically go back to the drawing board and from the ground up, provide an estimate of what it costs them to provide the service that we're currently providing Discovery Depot, so that we had that context that we could apply to future discussions or discussions on a future multi-year agreement. And we did that. And we also had discussions, staff-to-staff discussions with Mansfield Discovery Depot. And I've had conversations with the board president, Steve Farino. And I think what we have in place here, this proposed agreement, is fair and equitable for all parties. It does represent a continuation of what I'll call a market correction, trying to get those fees in line with the actual cost of what we're providing, but ensuring that we can, ask any inquiring taxpayer, respond to any inquiring taxpayer with an answer that's yes, we believe we're fully recovering our cost. I want to stress that there can't be a markup. The town cannot try to make a profit off of what it provides Mansfield Discovery Depot. So what we try to do is recover our actual costs and basically break even, if you want to call it that. So the agreement you have in the packet, and I included the most recent agreement, the one that expired in end of June 2020 for reference purposes, so you can kind of do a compare and contrast if you wanted to. But this agreement would go through the end of June 2025, so it's a little over 3 years. It's 3 years and 4 months, I guess, from now. But I want to also emphasize, and this is a provision that's been part of these contracts at least the last few, and that is, while this is a multi-year agreement and it lays out the financial terms that would govern the agreement for each of those fiscal years that are covered, I want to make sure everybody's also aware that this is and it isn't a multi-year agreement. It is in the sense that it lays out the financial terms. It isn't in the sense that either party, if for one reason or another feels that the arrangement is not working for them, have the ability to end the agreement in midstream. There just has to be notice given before the conclusion of a given fiscal year. So it's important for the council to know, and for anybody who's interested in this to know that, it provides flexibility in the event that there needs to be a sort of re-examination of the arrangement, what's being provided, whether it's, facilities, services, or anything else. And so I guess I'll stop there. That's my sort of 30,000-foot overview. Happy to answer any questions the council may have. But I just want to add that I think it's the Discovery Depot's, their board's intent to act on this if the council approves it at its meeting next week, if I have my schedule right.
Mr. Katzenberger, followed by Ms. Berthelot, followed by Mr. Coleman.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. I support doing this again with, I think we have it listed as item 3. I believe we should either not commit to provide information technology services, and the reasons have to do, I think we need to have a better sense of what particular vulnerabilities that may create in our own systems. That's true whether every system is not only, the cybersecurity is not simply their own, what we have on our website, but also what, if any, risks are incurred by entities coming, that we allow in. That has an effect on insurance as well as, most important, the cybersecurity. I don't know if that's an issue. But I think it's significant enough that we should, if we approve that tonight, we should carve that out and make that, that something we review within the next 6 months, or we could leave it out altogether.
I guess I would just add, so Jamie obviously was a part of developing this, and you know, I don't know that he's on the call now. He might have been earlier, but you know, I guess when it comes to substantive changes, you know, in terms of the services being provided, I don't know all the ins and outs of what Jamie's team provides, other than, you know, I do think it's a service that you know, they would be hard to supplant, and so if there are specific follow-up questions, you know, you want me to address to Jamie and answers to sort of garner from him, I'm happy to do that. I guess, you know, to the extent that that's a concern, I guess perhaps I would prefer to leave it in there, and perhaps a motion could be made with some, you know, conditional information or additional information provided by IT, but not to strike it from the agreement right now.
If I could respond to that.
Can I get some clarity on something? I'm not quite sure, Mr. Katzenberger, what exactly you're concerned about. Are you suggesting that people using the computers or the electronic devices at the Discovery Depot might introduce malware or something that would harm the town?
I mean, I guess that's always possible, but no. I mean, my primary concern is that I believe that, you know, as do other entities that, you know, we work with, shared services, which I am absolutely in favor of, IT creates additional risks, whether it's the Mansfield Depot or any other entity, because they're, to the extent that they're involved with our systems, have access to various sources that it's controllable, but I think we have to recognize it. It's not, you know, it's not simply the costs, and nor is it any lack of diligence. I'm certainly not suggesting by the Discovery Depot, but we need, you know, I know this is a concern in terms of acquiring insurance, the cost, but also the cybersecurity itself. I do not feel comfortable continuing this for 3 years. We may be fine with it after we have a discussion with Jamie, but I think it's a more extensive discussion than that. And I think we should either carve it out or make sure that we can terminate this particular aspect if we need to. I think the concerns are is that they're sort of a vendor in a sense, and their ability to access our systems. And I don't know how much it is, but I understand it's more. It's not simply that we, you know, they're not a separate system completely independent of ours, and that, as with any vendor, creates risks. And I don't know how, you know, I think it's harder to manage some of these risks with some organizations than others, but that's a question for Jamie.
Yeah, I don't know that there is actually any connection between the two. I believe they are in fact entirely separate. I think that it really is a matter of, you know, the analogy I would use is, you know, they are contracting out for IT services from a vendor that happens to be the town. And so just as there might be a for-profit, you know, IT firm that has its own system in an office somewhere, when it goes onto a campus to provide support for another client, there's not an interconnection there. I think that's the case here. You know,
I'm not sure that's, I've gotten other information. I hate to interrupt, but I think we should, you know, we can have an executive session on this at another time with some concerns to address there. But I think it's significant enough that at least I would not vote for this without some kind of limitation. And I absolutely believe in shared services, and I could be convinced, but I think it's significant enough an issue that I would not vote for it tonight, to keep it in as is. We may have a meeting and we may be absolutely fine with having to put in. I'd like to provide the services that we've done in the past, but I think it's more extensive than that.
Mr. Katzenberger, we've spoken earlier about insurance against cyber crimes. Would that cover this? Would that take care of your concern?
It can. It very much depends on the insurance policy, which probably we don't want to go into a discussion tonight, although I'm happy to do. But in all seriousness, yes, it may. It's also an issue in terms of the cost of insurance and obtaining insurance, and it's something I think we need to have a little better handle on. Some of which, again, would be part of an executive session, I think, and others, you know, not.
I think, you know, we should probably plan to set up some time to the extent that there's some concerns to talk with Jamie. You know, I think it behooves us probably not to get into details about the intricacies of our systems. Especially to the extent there could be any vulnerabilities. We want to talk about that in an open forum.
Right, correct.
All right, other comments. Ms. Berthelot, followed by Mr. Coleman, followed by Mr. Osberger.
Thank you. I'm alarmed by the framing of the contract as if this is just like any other business in town who's paying us to provide services without recognizing the very long past with MDD, that MDD didn't just spring out of nowhere and just come to us and say, hey, would you provide some help? That actually they exist because the town and the university together recognized in the 1970s how important childcare was. And that is so alarming to me to have it framed like this. Right now, childcare is barely staying alive at any level. That the daycare providers are really struggling. And we as a town were way in front of this in the 70s. We recognized that women needed to work, that they couldn't stay home, and they needed a place for their children to receive care. And MDD is unique from the other facilities in town because since the beginning, it's gotten a state, because the town applies for a state contract. That state contract makes it such that under-resourced families can send their kids to a daycare facility that is of the highest caliber. It is NIAC accredited and has been for a very long time, and it's consistently maintains that accreditation. And because of our involvement early on, the providers had health insurance and retirement, which is almost unheard of in the daycare community. So we were way out in front, we're leaders in this. And over the years, we've been cutting back and distancing ourselves from this commitment and putting the MDD staff and the community of families who use their services in a position of not knowing whether or not they can count on us for. And so words like, oh, we can just, we're not really committed to this are really disturbing to me, because these are folks who are dedicated to their profession, who are not paid enough, and who we as a township would be supporting. And rather than framing it as we're supporting them too much relative to the other daycare providers in town, maybe we should be thinking about how we should be providing how we could be supporting those other providers. That said, I'll say that MDD is unique, as it's always been reaching out and providing services to families who are under-resourced. It's always been a place of diversity, and it's always been a place where students got a meal while they were there. So very different than the other programs in town, which are all high caliber, but are meeting different needs. So the framing of this, I'm unsettled. Obviously, you can tell. I pray you will all remember how important daycare is to women and to families and to children, and that children who get high quality daycare are more likely to succeed in the rest of their lives. So let's not be backing off right now when daycare is so important, when every day you read in the paper that these programs are going under. And let's take this moment to step up, recognize our history, and stay true to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Coleman, followed by Mr. Osberger.
Yes, the town of Mansfield is in a position of being a landlord to MDD, which provides services for Wyndham, Tolland, Coventry, and maybe another town or two in that as well. Being a landlord, Ryan, do we collect any rent there?
The monies that we receive are for the services we provide. I'm not aware of any, fee for the building specifically for occupancy, if that's what you're asking.
Being the landlord, we carry a liability insurance on that property, I take it. What is actually the liability coverage if there were an incident there?
I'm certainly not prepared to respond to what that is on off the cuff. I would have to get with finance and review our insurance to answer that.
Being the landlord, we're responsible for major repairs. From that money comes from taxpayer budget, correct? Any major repairs done on that building?
Repairs done, capital projects that are done on the building are, paid for as part of our CIP program. CIP has a variety of funding sources, but the single largest is a contribution from the general fund, so through taxation. Yeah.
Being the landlord and the owner of the building, is there actually an option that we could sell it to the MDD?
Well, I can say that my understanding is that the means by which the town acquired the property from the state, that the deed includes a reverter clause such that if the town, there's a few criteria that have to be met. Basically, the town acquired the property to operate a daycare facility for which the town would be, a part of through ownership of the building, basically in perpetuity. And if that arrangement were to change, i.e. if the town wanted to use the property for something other than daycare, or the town wanted to sell the property to another entity, even if it was going to continue to serve as a daycare, if any of those things, those criteria didn't continue to be met, that a reverter clause would kick in, and the state would have basically the ability to take the land back. So the short answer to your question is there are means by which the town could part with the property, but it gets into an area that, as far as I know, hasn't been researched in terms of what the state's interest would be in taking advantage of the reverter clause and taking it back if there was ever a proposed change.
Ryan, there was legislation. It was introduced for some piece of property in the town owned for educational facilities that had a reverter clause, and I thought the legislation eliminated the reverter clause. And I thought it was for MDD, but it might have been for another piece.
We'll happy to do research. I guess my understanding about the legislative, fix or whatever you want to call it that you're referring to actually was that it further clarified, the things that would trigger the reverter clause. Not that it did away with it, but actually sort of reinforced it. But I haven't researched it, Mayor. I'd have to look into it, but I'm drawing on, kind of old recollections at this point, but I think that's the case.
I think we changed that. But I also want to point Mr. Coleman to section 2 sub G. Mansfield Discovery Depot is required to contain and maintain liability and auto property insurance for the contents of the building, and they have to provide a certificate of insurance and there are a whole series of other things they have to protect the town against.
Just so you understand, lawsuits, even though the tenant may have their own insurance, a lawsuit, generally the lawyers go after everybody, and that would include the town. So I am interested in the amount of liability coverage that the town has on that building to make sure that a lawsuit wouldn't spill over into taxpayer money.
The requirement is the coverage includes the town of Mansfield as an additionally insured party. But notice this is for contents of the building. This is not for the building itself. I would assume that the building itself is insured under our KERMA coverage.
Yeah. We own the building, so I'm quite confident we carry insurance on it.
Is there a ceiling on the coverage and liability?
We'll be happy to research it and provide a report on how it's currently.
There's always a ceiling.
And I believe that Mr. Kotcherberger has been recommending that we raise our ceiling, but our insurance advisor has said it wasn't necessary.
But it's quite high.
Yeah.
It's high, yeah. Okay, Mr. Osberger, followed by Ms. Berthelot. You're muted, Charlie.
I was only going to suggest that if we hadn't come to a consensus on this, that since this thing has been, well, the contract has been sitting since the 17th of or since June 30th of 2020, that, we could table it for one more week. Just an oddball suggestion that it seems like the taxpayers of Mansfield have been footing the bill for people out of town. And I'm not saying that I don't agree with, Terry Berthelot's assessment that single mothers need daycare. I was a single dad for all of my life and raised my daughter, and I needed daycare. There's no two ways about it. I wouldn't have been able to do it without it. But are we subsidizing other towns, and should we look at this as like a Region 19 where other towns should be kicking in and helping us out with this building or helping us out with this?
Ms. Berthelot.
The overwhelming amount of people at MDD are the children either live here or their parents work here. I don't have the number obviously off the top of my head, but we've recently looked into that, and it's overwhelmingly, shockingly so, how many are actually from Mansfield, given that Mansfield has an all-day daycare and some of our surrounding community, an all-day kindergarten, some of our surrounding communities don't. But the numbers still bear out that it's overwhelmingly Mansfield families or the parents work here in Mansfield. MDD is unique in that unlike the child labs, it's open year round. And as I can't stress enough the importance of the fact that kids get a solid meal. All kids get a solid meal while they're there. I'd like to make the motion.
Go ahead.
Move to authorize the town manager to execute the attached service agreement between the town of Mansfield and the Mansfield Discovery Depot for the period July 1st, 2021 to June 30th, 2025.
Is there a second to Ms. Berthelot's motion? Mr. Shaken seconds. You want to speak further to your motion? Ms. Berthelot?
Absolutely. I've already spoken, but I want to stress that this is a relationship that the town started in the 70s, that this was being in the front of a movement that was important not only to women, but as Charlie points out, to men as well, but mostly to children, that the importance of having quality educational experiences for children regardless of their financial situation is of key importance. And what MDD makes it it creates a space where children of means are there, but because of the state money that the town gets as a contract and gives and then makes available to MDD children, because of that, it's a diverse place. It's a place that focuses on equity and inclusion. And this is a contract, this is a relationship that we should all support. Thank you.
Mr. Shakin?
I just want to say I agree with that, but I also want to add some fiscal arguments. I understand some of the conversation has been about Mansfield's subsidy of this program. My understanding is that this agreement effectively ends whatever ongoing subsidy Mansfield had been providing. And I just want to make a point to my friends on the other side of the aisle that that the act of doing the evaluation that Ryan has done to provide an actual cost number to the shared services that Mansfield Discovery Depot gets from the town has been a very, very long-standing drum beaten by your colleagues. And so I want to commend the town manager and staff for doing it, for putting realer and more direct more direct numbers on the benefit that that the town provides, and therefore the charge that the town has negotiated to charge back to this piece of shared services. But I have to say, this is a service that I believe we ought to continue to offer. And I think the council needs to send a strong message to the Discovery Depot and its families that, just as we did several years ago when there was the potential for some significant financial hard times at the depot, that the town stands by its support for the program, that there's no intention on the town's part to sell the building off or to stop delivering stop including the Discovery Depot as part of the services that the town offers. And I think an agreement that codifies those services for the next several years makes a lot of sense. I understand there's capital improvements that building will need in the future, and those are discussions, those are outside of this agreement, and those are conversations we'll need to have in the future as we figure out how to spend our CIP and whether the Discovery Depot needs to be part of those conversations or not, given that they occupy the building. But at the end of the day, the building's ours, just like we spend our money on the schools when they need a roof, and just like we spend our money, quote unquote, on the senior center when it needs a parking lot paved, and the Discovery Depot building that we own needs work. The town pays for it. If it wasn't going to be that way, we wouldn't have ever bought the building or gotten the building from the state, and we wouldn't have opened the program. So it's the commitment that we made when we opened the program many years ago, and it's a commitment I think we ought to keep.
Mr. Coleman, I saw your hand up.
Yes. Actually, I kind of lost my train of thought on this, but give me a minute. Yes, the contract, the length of the contract is through 2025. I could support this motion if we maintained a 3-year contract, making it retroactive back to July 2020. My reasoning for that would be the amount of inflationary pressure that everybody's under, and it would leave it open to adjust our charges for the services we provide MDD.
Any further comment? Mr. Katzenberger. You're still muted.
Sorry, my computer was almost out. I don't know if Terry would consider this as a friendly amendment, because again, I support both the concept of, certainly support this, commitment to it, and as well as shared services. But the IT concern, I think, is potentially significant. We need more information. I don't really want to hold this up any longer. I don't know if Terry, if we would remove what's labeled as optional already. Remove this, I think it's number 3, the towns to provide the following information technology services to MDD and then the associated costs that they would pay us. My concern is not at all related to subsidizing these costs. It's understanding better the vulnerability that it provides, both cybersecurity and difficulties with insurance. And so I don't want to hold this up, but it is not a trivial matter at all, and also one that really would need to be discussed more in executive session.
Ms. Berthelot?
If I could respond, Peter, I think I would say that the fact that we're providing IT is distinct with the parameters about how we're going to provide IT. I trust Jamie as a professional is aware of the concerns that you're aware of, but that doesn't need to get hammered out in the contract. That's part of the professional role that he plays to ensure that any work he does is protecting the town from cyber attacks.
It's more than that, though. It's significantly more than that. And it's not something we can really talk about.
But does it go? And I don't know that it goes in the contract. I think that's his professional world. That's his duty to take care of those things, and that's part of it's his responsibility to ensure when he provides the work for them that he's keeping the town secure.
Yes, it's more than that, however.
Mr. Shaken.
Is discussing the town's cybersecurity a legal topic for the council to address during executive session?
I believe so.
Then I'd like to present two distinct options. One is the suggestion that understanding perhaps things that other counselors don't quite grasp about what Peter is alluding to, but not saying out loud, that if, Peter, you are correct, that our costs may increase dramatically as it relates to cybersecurity in the future, that we would need to amend literally every single agreement that we have with every shared service in order to recoup the full breadth of those costs. That you might consider approving this agreement with that understanding. But if not, that we at least have a chance to very briefly have an open conversation about what exactly it is that you're talking about. And if you would like to hash that out quickly, that we do it in an executive session so we can speak freely without being coy.
I think
I would suggest that to have this discussion without Jamie Russell, who's our director of IT, present.
Oh, I agree, but I could at least explain my concern. That's all. I mean,
so I'd like to make a motion that we enter an executive session to discuss the town's cybersecurity.
I'm going to try to get Jamie. I am trying to get Jamie available.
We don't need Jamie.
No.
We invite Ryan, and if Jamie's available, Jamie, to that session.
I'll second that motion.
All right, there's a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing cybersecurity. We have a maker and a second. Does anybody wish to abstain from this motion? Does anybody wish to vote in the negative? Mr. Coleman, you want to vote in the negative?
I'm looking for a shorter contract in order to safeguard ourselves from inflation and increase.
No, the motion is whether or not we go into executive session to discuss cybersecurity.
You're right.
Okay, so are you okay? Is there anybody who wishes to oppose the motion to go into executive session? Then the motion is carried unanimously. The executive session will include Mr. Aylesworth, members of the council, Mr. Russell, if he can be available, and
the finance manager,
finance, if she is
She's
available.
not here. So it's just us, Peter. We just need to talk about what you've already.
There is actually, I'm not sure if that's Charmaine, but there's a finance Mansfield still on.
Yes.
I am here. I'm here.
Sorry.
Okay. So we'll give a minute to turn off the recording for other people to leave. Since this is the last item on our agenda, I don't know if it's
recording
necessary.
Stopped.
for anybody else to be present.
You can just put people in the waiting room and then let them back in.
Okay, I'm going to put people in the rate. And Ryan, you are co-host, so you can let people in
Okay.
when the executive session is over.
Yep. And I'll look for Jamie as well if he's able to join.